Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, my business partner, the dear, the wonderful, Mr. Jason Three Names, Jason Johnston Yellen. Oh, I said that just as you're taking a sip of your whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
How are you? How are you, Jason?
I'm all right, thank you. It's, yeah.
Did I ask the question at a wrong time? What's going on?
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Yeah. Since we're among friends,
okay.
You and I talk about this all the time. Traditionally, whiskey would have an OND, an October, November, December.
Correct.
And then whiskey started having an OND JFM, right? And so January, February, March were just, a little less busy, but still pretty intense. And then you would start looking forward to the spring of the year, and then certainly the summer, where things would really calm down and you could really catch your breath. You could really just tidy up some things.
I look forward to that every year.
Exactly. And that's why my answer to your question was a little bit, oh well. It's just really busy all the time. And even though July is a different kind of busy to the darker months, the wetter months, the colder months, I know that as busy as I am now, I'll be even more busy in another 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Continue.
Well, yeah. Just before we started recording, you and I were going over the list of all of the stuff in the queue to be bottled, whether it's for the U.S., for both retail and online, and for the rest of the world. And it's like over 20 casks all together of stuff needing to be bottled. And it is an interesting thing because on top of that, normal whiskey life has changed and it's busier. But it is interesting to still be in that mode of trying to think 6 months ahead of time. But we're a bit behind. We're a bit behind the eight ball here, right? Because COVID slowed up things in unusual and varying ways. And we're talking about bottling all the stuff for the OND, like you'd mentioned, October, November, December. But we're really late if we're thinking about it properly. We're really late to be doing all that.
Correct.
And
which is why my answer is my answer. So, but as you're mentioning there, looking forward to other things coming in, we have a second collaboration with the Water of Life film people, Greg Swartz, who was a recent episode for us. And today, my own advance sample of the Stones of Stenness bottling came in. And as you mentioned, you asked me the question just as I was taking a sip of whiskey. I was taking my very first sip of the bottled Stones of Stenness 17-year-old that was bottled for the Water of Life film collaboration.
And was it the neck pour? I mean, I imagine you just dumped that down the sink because that's apparently what you're meant to do.
It's controversial, isn't it? It is controversial. I am currently consuming the neck pour, and I'm trying to decide whether or not I should have done that. I will also say this: I did cheat a little bit. This came in off a UPS truck this morning.
Yeah,
it came in around about noon, maybe just before noon, and so the day hadn't quite got as hot as it will get. And I let it sit in my office for about an hour before I popped the cork on it. And as I feel it now, I think it's come back down to room temperature. But as we say to even other nation members or in the US here, when those bottles are coming in and they're coming off the UPS truck, like give them 24 hours in your house. Just let them settle again. Those trucks can be cruel mistresses, and some people have said to us, well, do you ship seasonally? Should you ship seasonally? Who are we making happy if we ship seasonally?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that advice well advised. That's good advice. The neck pour is complete hogwash. Just pour the dram, let it sit in your glass for 10, 15 minutes. See what happens. Drink it slowly, let it evolve. It's not bad whiskey. It's just
That's exactly, partly I wanted to have this first pour with the good listeners of the One Nation Under Whiskey podcast, but also to have it here with you. I know your advanced sample hasn't come in just yet.
No.
And I'm sorry to hear that. Thankfully, it's nothing to do with me, so so I feel okay on that front. I have been letting this sit and breathe. The other part to add was selling this at 1 per person, US Nation members only, sold out in 90 minutes.
yeah.
And so, if that had been allowed multiple bottles, it would have gone a lot faster than that. But I felt like an hour and a half. Unless something has really gone horribly wrong with your day, an hour and a half is a window to get a bottle.
Isn't it interesting that feels like the comfortable number? Like you've had your time, you've had your 90 minutes. When earlier on when we started the company, we're like, look, you've had your 9 months. You've had your 9 months to place an order.
You've had your 22 months, right? Our Colhoman, 22 months. Couldn't give it away.
But I think that is good, right? An hour and a half, thankfully, appeased most. Of course, you can never please all, but we do our best to appease most. And there's a Nation member / podcast listener. I won't bring up his name because I think he shared this story sort of just between us. But, he, his wife, and his kid were traveling in an airport and, trying to get through security with the child seat and like all this stuff. And he was just assumed he was going to miss it. And then here he was an hour and 15 minutes in, and he was still able to get a bottle. And he just assumed the worst, which you get, right? Because the online bottlings tend to sell out fairly immediately. So, yeah, even someone who is negotiating a baby and car seats in the TSA and masks and all this stuff, he was able to get his bottle. So that was very good.
The final part I'll add to this is we've been shipping this incredibly quickly. Our shipper and the team have done remarkable work on getting this out, and I think those on the East Coast should be starting to see the bottles real soon as well. Mm-hmm. And so now the next step for us is nailing down the viewing date and time. Because, as a reminder, every single person who bought a bottle of this also received a ticket to the viewing of the Water of Life film with panel afterwards. And so we will say more about that, probably over email. We'll discuss it in the podcast because we can't help ourselves. But we will be emailing all purchasers with a date, with a time, and more information about the panel once that gets all firmed up.
If the panel shapes up the way it's looking to shape up, it's going to be a hell of a time. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. So Jason, let's shift gears a little bit here. This is, today's interview is one of those rarer instances where one of us went off to interview someone solo-like. And
very rare.
Right? Very rare, especially these days. And so you interviewed Bill Thomas, Jack Rose Dining Saloon. And what do you want to let the listeners know about before we get into this interview, which I want to talk about it a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. But I'm curious of what your goal was when setting up this interview.
I can answer that very easily for you.
Okay.
And I might echo this in the recording with Bill, but I want to take a moment to really bring light to it. Bill Thomas is an incredibly busy guy. And when I go through to DC and I have an appointment, I have a time to meet with him, Sometimes I'll taste him on some things if the opportunity arises. Sometimes I'll just be discussing things with him. I always feel I'm keeping him from his next thing. And that's not because Bill Thomas is an arrogant guy who looks at his watch and is halfway out the door when he's talking to you. It's because I know how busy he is and I know how many projects he has. And a very special memory for me was a few years ago. I was in DC, I was doing a tasting, a pouring, an event, and I stayed at Bill's house the evening of that pour.
Yeah.
And he and I sat on his rooftop and we popped some corks and we just sat and we talked whiskey. And I didn't have anywhere to be. He didn't have anywhere to be.
Yeah.
I did feel like I was keeping him from his bed at some point because I know he doesn't sleep very much. But we just sat there and I started to get a sense of who he is and what he's about. And I was actually up early the next morning. I was out his house before anybody in the house was awake. I had a plane to go catch. And so and so I never even got to say bye to him in the morning. And it really did feel like, did last night happen on the rooftop, having the chat? You know, we sometimes use this word in whiskey circles where it really was magical, right? And ever since then, you and I have wanted to get him on the podcast. But selfishly, I've wanted to just sit down with him and have a conversation where I didn't feel like he had another thing to be at, I had another thing to be at. It was just sitting down for the sake of the podcast.
Yeah.
And so when I had a chance, just as we're starting to come out of COVID, just as we're getting vaccinated, as we're able to sit there, I definitely say this in the recording, we were unmasked, but the table is about 6 feet across because we were sitting in a booth. And so we were socially distanced without planning to be socially distanced. It's just the design and the shape of the booth we were sitting in.
Sure.
But it felt like the beginning of a return to normal times as we discussed all of the abnormal times he's gone through, the bar has gone through, his staff has gone through, his business partner has gone through. We discussed a time that was frightening, that he worked his tail off to survive, but to also support his staff during that.
Yeah.
And then we discussed the history of Bill Thomas and Jack Rose, and then we talked COVID, and then we talked the whiskey scene, and then we talked his own buying of casks. And by the end of it, we started talking about a part 2, right? Because even sitting there for an hour and a half, we didn't cover the things that we'd hoped to cover. And even some of the questions that I was asking him were things that he is starting to work on, things that he's starting to look at. How will it impact the business? One of the things that's of huge interest to me, and I think will have huge impact for the industry, is we've had establishments working on 1 month turnaround. And we've had them have hiring practices where, okay, I want to bring in good people, but how do we keep good people? How do we offer them wages? How do we offer them sick leave? Yeah. Nobody's hired with sick leave, right? Nobody's protected in this industry. And I started asking Bill about, what do you think the future will look like? And how will you put practices in place? And that's a huge philosophical question for the entire industry, where Bill Thomas is only one person among many hundreds and hundreds of thousands who are trying to answer that question. So in setting up a part 2, there's going to be follow-up. There's going to be a response to, what did I start asking you in that part 1? That we can revisit in part 2 as well.
Yeah. Well, let me say just a few things here before we hand it over to you and Bill.
Yeah, please.
I'm not going to talk specifically about. I'm going to wait. I have some comments I want to make, but I'm going to wait until after we come out of the interview. But what I liked about this was, we've done a bar episode before, but it was where we had a few minutes from Mike Miller at Delilah's and a few minutes with Aaron Zacharias from Fountainhead, right? Where this was the first time you did a deep dive with an industry person who is responsible for shaping people's palates. And 2-3 years ago when we did the other bar episode, I thought it was a great episode, and I thought it did exactly what we wanted to do. But after listening to this one, I realized that episode didn't do nearly what we wanted to do because there's so much to learn. There's so much to glean from these conversations from these wonderful people. Bill Thomas with Jack Rose, Mike Miller with Delilah's, Mike at Travel Bar, right? The folks at Twisted Spoke in Chicago, and
Christopher Grombeck
at Barrel Thief, and we can go on and on. Tommy Tardy at Flatiron Room, right? You can go on and on and on. And I think that these are really important conversations to be having and to be sharing with people. And I wouldn't say we've avoided it in the past. We surely have not avoided it in the past, but it was never a route that we took. And after hearing this conversation, it's after you've taken that left turn, I just want to follow that road, and I want to be interviewing more people who are on the front lines, especially, hearing about what were the front lines like during COVID. What are the front lines going to look like coming out of COVID? And I think there's going to be some really important conversations to be had. So I have other comments I want to make, but I just want to thank you for really championing this conversation with Bill and bringing it to our listeners, because it's a special conversation.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It was a pleasure conducting it. One of the things for me is, on one hand, you look at Bill Thomas and you've got a guy who is a fellow whiskey lover like us. And he's making some selections both on the bottles that he brings in, but also some of the cask picks that he's been doing. During COVID, he's pivoted to running a retail store, right? Where people come in off the street and buy bottles from him. At the same time, he's tried to support his staff. He's a business owner. He's got people in his life who he supports as much as he possibly can. That's just simply a business owner through and through. That has nothing to do with whiskey. That's just the category in which he has his business.
Yeah.
And so he's wearing so many different hats that I think it's easy to think, oh, you just have a whiskey chat with Bill Thomas. Well, you can, but if you also start to peel away the layers of the onion and you have a business conversation with Bill Thomas, boy, is that a completely different conversation. Yeah. And that's true of those other people you named as well, where Mike, I'm a local bar. What do you do when your locals can't come out to support you? Christopher Grombeck up in Seattle, Washington passed legislation, temporary legislation, where he could open his own retail store within his bar. How does that affect his relationship with his customers, with his staff? Like there are so many questions. And then just hospitality industry writ large has been operating on minimal margins for so very long. You've got so many staff who operate on tips, who live on tips, who have no health insurance. Yeah. Right? It takes this global pandemic to say, we knew the industry shouldn't be running like that, but how do we really now make wholesale changes so that the industry doesn't run like that? And then what does that mean? People talk about this with pricing. What does that mean? Nobody walks into a bar, nobody walks into a retail store and says, that bottle's too cheap. that meal's too cheap. Everybody walks in and says, I wish that was a little bit cheaper, right? It already wasn't supporting the industry at the price it was at. And now we're going to look for it to be, the price is probably going to go up a bit to support people in the way people should be supported. What does that mean? What's the knock-on effect of that? It becomes huge and it becomes societal very quickly.
Yes.
Those are these conversations that only the first domino has been pushed over in this conversation with Bill.
Yeah.
And there's going to be 100 more dominoes to discuss.
And that's why I said we've taken this left turn. I want to follow it. It's an ever-evolving story with a multitude of voices sharing their own experiences that just help paint this larger picture. So I'm excited for that, but more importantly, at least more immediately, I should say, I'm excited for this conversation between you and Bill. So let's hand it over to you guys, and we'll meet everybody on the back end.
Bill, I've wanted to do this for a long time. You're not an easy man to get hold of, even though you just simply live in DC and operate Jack Rose Dining Saloon. What keeps you so busy, man?
Trying to keep this place afloat for the last year and a half, and before that, keep it stocked. So I don't just hustling, I guess.
It's funny when somebody asks me, could you give me one word that summarizes Bill Thomas? Hustling would be the absolute word that would come to mind.
That's what my doormat says outside my house, actually.
Does it really?
Yeah, it says hustle. And then the quote from Abraham Lincoln is over the fireplace.
What's that one?
That's good things come to those who wait, but only those things left by those who hustle. Yeah.
Man, you really are the genuine article. I like it. So obviously Jack Rose came into your life. I think your numbers are similar to our numbers. You're about 10 years in with Jack Rose at this point?
Yeah, just over, yeah.
And so I had the pleasure of your company at your house one night, and we drank through a lot of tasty, tasty treats. And I got to find out a bit more about you. You are a DC guy. Am I right in saying that? Or you at least came to DC as a younger fellow?
Well, my parents moved out when I was born. But my family's been here, opened the first bar here in 1885.
Right.
And so been around a long time, but I ended up growing up just outside in PG County.
Okay.
And then moved into the city when I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
I believe, yeah.
What did that look like?
Back then?
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing because the city was wide open. Just a different area. I mean, we had been coming to DC. I mean, we couldn't, as soon as we got out of school, we'd jump in our car and get here and just, get into whatever trouble we could, which was easy in the 80s because DC was just falling apart.
Murder capital,
yeah.
Of the U.S. at that point?
Of the U.S., but per capita, it was something crazy. I mean, we were just, there was so much trouble and there was such no oversight, and the drinking age was 18.
Oh, okay.
So it was nothing to see bars filled with 15-year-olds, and everybody had fake IDs and nobody really checked, and it was the Wild Wild West back then. So,
and the basketball team was called the Bullets.
The basketball team was called the Bullets. What else was? I mean, we would drive home past the White House every night, which in the old days when it was open, and we just shit hanging out of the car, and people. How we never got in trouble or worse. It's amazing. We got thrown out of a lot of clubs, but not for being 15 and being up to no good. So
and so at that point, did you think your future was in DC? Did you think this was going to be a time period and then you'd move elsewhere?
Yeah, I only had 3 goals as a kid, and that was the first one was just to live in DC. That was goal number 1. That's the only thing I wanted to do was live in DC. And the second one was to have a great house, and the third one was to make $1 million. And we all know that $1 million isn't anything anymore. That's like 10 bottles of the right whiskey. So I've got to set my goals a lot higher if I'm gonna. I was just watching a finance show last night, and it says the average person has to save $1 million in the bank for retirement.
Yes.
Because we're living so long. And I was like, so
Yes.
$1 million is just for you to live a middle class existence, which is baffling to me because growing up $1 million seems so unattainable.
Like you're a made man for life at that point.
Yeah, at that point you're just like, buying your way out of trouble. And instead of begging your way out of trouble.
So when you and I were talking at your house, you talked about you and your brother doing video stores.
Yes.
And I thought that was absolutely captivating, that you had the wherewithal to see that market in that time period. How old were you guys when you set up?
Oh, no. That was, my dad was
okay.
a major appliance salesman for JCPenney's.
Okay.
Just a really, talk about a hustle. That guy was a salesman. It was amazing. And he saw that whole video craze coming. So when
Gotcha.
I was 10, Rich was 12, Dad opened the first store. There was this tiny little video store, and it was just like, took off like a rocket. And so we ended up, by the time I was, I don't know, when I was 15 years old, we were running the company. Dad was, he was back to doing his old stuff, which we can't talk about, but he had made enough money to do what he wanted to do. And Rich and I ran the company, and by 94 was a record year. 95, business fell off 35%. We knew it was the end. We were like, the internet had just taken over. It wasn't like Blockbuster or anything like that. We actually, our last store, we actually opened up against them. We moved in on them, opened up like a store like a third of the bigger than them. We were pretty cocky, and that store was the very last store that actually closed. But we were by the end of 95, Rich and I knew that it was over. We had to get out, and we were like looking at each other like, "What do you want to do?" And we looked at everything, and we were like, "We should get back into the bar business," and that's what we did. So I started working on a bar by the end of 96. I was already like trying to get stuff going, and we had a location that we worked on for over a year that fell through after I had gotten architect's plans, done everything, but I just had a falling out with the landlord. He was being shady. So I walked out of that meeting, went home, looked at my parents, or went to their house, and I was like, you know what, I need some time. I'm out. This took a year plus. Called my ex-girlfriend in Germany. I was in Germany in less than 24 hours. And in the middle of winter with a backpack, with a book on backpacking Europe in the winter, And that was it. So I was in Hamburg, and we were just partying and stuff like that. And then she goes. I was like, let's go somewhere. Let's go to like Paris or something. So she was like, okay, I'll ask for time off from her job. So she asked for time off. We booked Paris. We were sitting in a bar in Germany. And I was just like feeling like the complete loser because I just spent a year and a half working on this bar and it fell through.
Sure.
And I looked at her and I was like, I'm flying home in the morning. She's like, what about Paris? And I gave her all the money that I had on me, which was like, I had a lot. I had, I guess, I don't know, it was like $3,000 or whatever. I put it on the counter. I was like, take whoever you want. And I jumped on a plane and flew immediately back. And we were negotiating on bars within 90 days. We were back in the game.
And so how? So you flew to Germany at 24 hours notice.
Yeah, stayed for a couple weeks.
A couple of weeks, and then your 24 hours notice, you were back again.
I was back. I just felt like such a loser. Had to get back.
Holy moly!
Yeah. And that was it. And then I got us into the bar business.
During that 2 weeks, was there a progression, or was it you were having a blast, and then woke up after 2 weeks and said,
"Yeah, we were having.
What am I doing? I gotta go home."
We were having a blast, and it was a great time. We were hitting clubs, and we were young, and everything was fantastic. I just literally, it just slowly was a grind on me that like I'd never taken that much time off in my life. 14 days was like,
weeks.
oh my God, what am I doing? Like I just felt like lazy. I couldn't take it. And then it was funny because once I got the bars open, I didn't take other than like having a day or I didn't take anything off for 3 years. I just worked the bars as fast as we could and got it back up and operational. I mean, I just pushed. So
I'm so glad we led this interview with you hustling. I'm so glad because 2 weeks off being the longest period of time you had off is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
We just had this the other day. I was talking to Jess about this, where there was something on Twitter and maybe it hit wider social media, but there was essentially a jokey Swedish out of office message that was essentially, I'm out of the office for the next 4 or 5 months. I've gone camping with my family. If you've got anything important, I will be back. I'll deal with it then.
Yeah.
And the American jokey out of office was, I've gone in for emergency surgery. Continue to send me your emails.
Yes.
If worst comes to worst, the surgeon will read them to me. Right? And so, for me growing up in Scotland, my dad, who worked really hard in construction, loved his vacation time, looked forward to his vacation time, thoroughly enjoyed it when he was on vacation, and didn't have that inkling, I must get back to work. Moving over to the US, I feel some of that pressure of, what do you mean vacation? Like, how long are you going away for?
Yeah.
Like, things are going to fall apart. Like, you got to keep working.
Yep.
Did you... Clearly, it's part of your DNA, but you also witnessed that. You were saying your dad was a natural-born salesman.
Yeah.
Was he also busting his hump, and you saw other family busting their hump?
When he was at
was that the example?
When he was at JCPenney, he got 1 week off a year, and that's it. That's what he got.
That's criminal, man.
He would take it the very last week of the summer so he could look forward to it for the other 50. And it was the same week, same vacation every time. We went to the same place, did the same things, which is great. I think for him, and I see it, is because when you only have 7 days, you want to know exactly the best way to spend that 7 days. To go on an adventure that may or may not turn out just wasn't worth it. He needed to decompress, relax for that one. That was it. It was just, so growing up with him, that was it. You just worked all the time and tried to, bank as much money as you could and, plan for the rainy day.
Sure.
That was
absolutely.
it. So
when you're talking about then coming back from Germany, doing the bar scene, given what we talked about DC looking like in the 80s, what did it started to look like by the mid 90s and then through the end of the 90s?
There was people like Joe Engler, who was a restaurant bar guy here, who was doing like creative nightclubs. Everything was on the cheap, shoestring. Everybody. It was a time of really shoestring creativity, I think, across the board. There was a few major bars or restaurants, but there wasn't a lot. I mean, you had your favorites. I remember, cell phones at that point you were connecting, but they were still big, and like you still haunted your regular spots, and you could count on your regular people. Now, with communication, you can shift spots a million times to find your friends or move along. A lot of times you went to especially in the early 90s, late 80s, you went to your places because that's where everybody you knew would be.
Sure.
Because if you didn't hook up with them or you missed them, you didn't see them for the rest of the night.
Sure.
Sure. So it's just a different kind of style of restaurants and bars. A lot of electronic, for us, a lot of electronic music. Music set the tone, not spirits, which is funny. It is. Now there's kind of there's finally kind of that congruence or it coming together in terms of music and spirits. But back then, you picked your bar based on music, not based on drinks. That was it.
And were there pockets to go into, pockets to avoid?
In DC?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And is that still true today?
I think there's a lot fewer pockets that you would stay away from, and there's just about the whole city's wide open from edge to edge. Our closest club when I was growing up was Trax, which was in one of the most desolate crime areas. And I remember it was like 6 weeks in a row, the car that we went, all the windows got smashed out. And, that was week after week. Shootings, as you waited in line to get in, drive-bys. It was nuts, but it was the greatest club. It was the best. It's where the stadium is now, where the old where Nats Park is.
Oh, okay.
That whole area,
okay.
Was kind of a neighborhood that had seen its better days, and industrial areas that had seen its better days. But
it must have been some kind of club if you were willing to give up car windows every single week for 6 weeks.
Yeah, it was the best club.
That's insane.
There's never been a club since or bar since.
So I have to ask them. So what made it so special? What was
it was really everyone from DC was there. I mean, every cross section. It didn't matter whether you were Hispanic, Asian, black, white, gay, straight. It was predominantly a gay club most of the week, and then it had kind of mixed nights certain nights, and there were certain areas that maybe a little bit more like there was a lot more of one group hanging out here, but one group was one bar was kind of more progressive music, the other one was more dance music, There was outdoor volleyball. There was like a cantina. It was just nuts, and it had thousands. I mean, it could fit as many people as you could figure, and everybody seemed to be harmonious. There was certain bathrooms that you would visit, and maybe certain bathrooms you wouldn't. It was nuts. It was just crazy. It was DC at its best. It was gritty. It was it's the beautiful thing about DC is, or when everything, if not one group is dominant, nobody feels out of place, and that's the best thing. I remember reading an article, I think in was it Time magazine or something, on like Mount Pleasant, and it's great when you have 25% white, 25% black, 25% Asian, 25%, and everyone is happy because no one feels out of place. Everybody feels equal, and that was kind of tracks. I mean, it really had that feel of no one was out of place, no matter what your sexual orientation was or ethnicity or whatever. And it was just a beautiful time, I think.
I think the pressing question is, was it Tracks with an X?
It was Tracks. No, KS. Yeah, Tracks.
Wow. Okay.
CKS. I don't know.
CKS.
I still have, because being a history guy, I keep all this stuff. So I still have like different stuff, I think, from them. Something with their name on it, and frontline passes for this and that, from other bars. Just being kind of a student of restaurants and bars because I loved them so much.
So with that love for Tracks, did you think you were... I know you're talking about having the bars going and the plans and all that. Did you think you would also be a nightclub guy? Was that appealing to you?
I didn't. I really liked electronic music, so we knew that was going to be a component of it, but we didn't know what else would take form around that. So I didn't know that when I opened the first bar that I was going to be doing DJs or bands 7 days a week, and that would become the entire focus. It just kind of took over. We got hot, and it just... You followed the money, and that was what happened. So,
you've answered the next question I was going to ask you, because you said something interesting a moment ago, where the bar scene, obviously club scene, was driven by music, not driven by spirits. In opening up a bar, did you think you would be driven by spirits, but then you went where the money was, and you ended up having the music be the driving force?
Well, the funny thing is, we opened up with one floor electronic music and the first floor was like a really kind of high-end bistro. And by that, I mean, it was really casual, but we had all Riedel stemware. We had a huge wine list. We had for its time, we had, all the beer, all the Belgians, Sam Smiths. We had, a great selection of spirits and stuff like that. We did. I mean, it was... blends were still pretty much ruling the day back then, even in the 90s. I mean, you still had, of course, Cuddy and Dewar's and Johnny Walker Blue, Black, Red. But we had all those things, and we were trying to, cocktails were not quite there yet. We were still making a lot of Cosmos and, Appletinis and then all the shooters and all that stuff. Anything anyone could learn in like 2 days if you went to bartend. But slowly over time, it started to morph. And I came up with an idea maybe 2 years in. We had only been open 2 years when I came up with the idea for bourbon.
Okay.
So I very quickly pivoted to another location that I wanted to open that would be completely American driven. So only American food, only American music. You had to be an American artist to be played. American beer, American wine. And then we were thinking about what would be the ultimate umbrella. And when we were all sitting around, there was like 5 of us, and we all realized that we were all drinking bourbon. And that was somebody, and it wasn't me. Somebody said, "Hey, what about bourbon as kind of an umbrella Americana?" And that's how. And then of course we went down that rabbit hole, and that was like nuts.
And so that started in the late 90s?
No, that started in the early 2000s.
Early 2000s. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you were... It's interesting because watching the rise of food in America, modern food in America, it was all French driven and French techniques.
Yep.
And you think about Julia Childs and her getting her show on PBS.
Yep.
And James Beard before her. To come out in the early 2000s and champion American food, was it a bit in the wilderness at that point? Was there thinking outside of cheeseburgers and fries?
Well, I mean, DC back then, and especially early on, 70s, 80s, 90s, was a steakhouse or French. Those are your two options.
Right.
That's what you did for the most part. And then, of course, a lot of ethnic food. There was a lot of, Ethiopian going on, a lot of Salvadorian, that kind of thing. But we did that simply because it kind of fit what we want to do spirits-driven wise. It was, fairly, you could put it out fairly inexpensive. And it just seemed to fit. In fact, I'm trying to think of I can't even think of who our original chef. Oh, the guy who I think I had, he's passed away now, but the guy who wrote the original the original menu for bourbon was my good friend who was at the time chef de cuisine at Citronelle. So I had him kind of consulting. I think at some point, and just so he designed the kitchen, just to make it easy for like one or two people to run, and that was it. So we just had that kind of a little bit of oversight there as a friend, and that was it. I don't know, and it just took off. I mean, it crazy took off. We were jam packed. It was nuts.
Did you find a lot of people believed in that vision, or did you have people say you're off your fucking head?
No. And the one thing we forget to mention is DC is now a fairly international city. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and going to, it was still the remnants of more of a southern city. I mean, it was really more of a conservative southern kind of, and by conservative, I don't mean, right? I mean, I'm just saw people, no showboating, that was just very low key. So there was still a lot of influence that responded to like classic American like comfort food.
I'm with you.
I'm
with you. Yeah.
So it was easy. There was a lot of people that, there was a fair amount of money still in the city. So you, especially on that side of town, you're just north of Georgetown. So you had a lot of people that were just, and to give you an idea, just to digress for a second, there was
please.
Somebody called me one day, and this is post the opening of this years later, and they go, we have a customer, they would like to sell a bunch of whiskey that they had. And I go, and they go, Bill, would you be interested? We're not interested in buying back like spirits. And I was like, sure. And they're like, we think it's a lot of prohibition stuff. And I was like, okay, right? So I go, okay. And I missed her. The woman has this amazing mansion. She's in her probably 80s. Amazing mansion in Georgetown. In fact, I just saw it up for sale the other day for $13 million, if anybody's interested. I hope she's, because this was years ago. I'm sure she'd be in her 90s now. But I missed her because she was going to summer in Maine. That kind of wealth. And then 3 months later, she got back passing through D.C. for 2 weeks before she goes to winter in the South, right? So I catch her. Great woman. She brings me in. She takes me down to this basement, and it's just rows of Prohibition in their old cellar. Just rows lined up. And I was just like, and she starts telling me, and I looked at it, and most of it had cooked. It had gone bad. I go, can I ask you about, where did this come from? She goes, well, we bought the house in the 50s, the mansion, house to her. And she's like, I think we brought this up from our house in North Carolina or South Carolina. And I go, okay, this makes sense. And she was like, wow, and I was telling her about all the bottles we were going through. She goes, wow, you really? She goes, there was this nice old family that we used to summer with or winter with, that was into whiskey. They did something in the industry, but I think they own something. Nice family, just regular people. And I was like, do you mean the Browns? The Browns, of like Brown Foreman. I'm like, the billionaire family that was the nice family they would summer with, because the wealth is like that. I was just like, I listened to her stories forever. She was telling me, all the young debutantes that came through, and I always wanted to, she was drinking like, they always wanted wine. She's like kicking back cocktails and whiskey. She was just like, she was really fun to talk to.
She sounds awesome.
Yeah, and we ended up buying. I said, listen, most of this is bad, like 95%.
So when you said it cooked, what were you seeing?
I was seeing that cloudiness. It was cloudy, and a lot of the glassware was in very good condition, but it just had been extreme heat. I said, I think some of this could be okay, and I said, I think these bottles, and I know that these 6 bottles are great. I know that they're whatever. They'll be fine. They had high whatever. They were in dark glass, and not the dark glass. I have no scientific proof that the dark glass protected it from, but for some reason it did happen that the dark glass bottles turned out to be good. The light glass bottles, just anecdotal, coincidental. But I said I'll give you $50 for every one that is like the dark, right? Because I cracked one open and it was great, and I still have like 2 left from that, which I'll probably never sell just because I love the story.
Yeah.
And she and she goes, I go, what do you like to drink? She Tanqueray Rampur. She goes, bring me a case of Tanqueray Rampur and $50 a bottle. I showed up the next day. She's like, where's my money? We're talking like a woman who's worth who knows how much. And the envelope full of like $300-$400 was more important to her. And I also had to clean her basement, was part of the group.
What?
I had to take every bottle out.
Oh, okay.
Every bottle, I couldn't leave anything. I couldn't just take the good stuff and and leave. So it was a great deal, actually, and there was a whole row of those that turned out to be fantastic. The rest I literally cracked open individually and poured them out and threw it away.
Because that's a shame.
I didn't want them, and I've seen this happen. I've seen whole collections that I passed on hit the secondary market, and people buying them at auction. It drives me insane. Yeah. I'm like, at least on 2 separate occasions, I've seen 3 separate occasions. I've seen stuff rebottled that I knew was bad. I mean, I've just like, this is, you've got to be careful. At least, like literally, I threw away a lot of money that day, but, in terms of like just destruction, because people still buy these things. Sure. And thinking it's like that old whiskey musk or whatever. I was like, no, that's just shit that's cooked and gone. I don't know why you like it, but anyways, but it was a great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but that's old Jordan. But that's the kind of old stories you would get, that was the kind of people that were around back then. So,
and that's the interesting thing you say here about DC hasn't always been this contemporary melting pot. And for me, it's been this hub of immigration and great cuisine, and really you could meet a real radical mix of people in DC. It's interesting to think of it as an older southern city, where that type of person started moving farther and farther south. Because then I think of Nova, right? Northern Virginia, which it was the same, but now it's Arlington and it's young people and it's becoming a blue stronghold, a Democratic hub, and that Old South has gone a little bit farther south again.
Absolutely.
So it is interesting to think of those waves of evolution. So Bourbon did fantastically well for you. The name of the place,
correct.
That's the thing that when I was at your house with you, the thing that I loved was your prescience in seeing the death of videos, right? I loved that. When you told me that, I was like, that makes sense for what I know about you now. So you had the prescience to get out of video rentals. You then had the prescience to do something with American cuisine and bourbon. And then you saw it derelict boxing gym, a rundown boxing gym.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because as much as, with blood, sweat, and tears, you turned that into Jack Rose Dining Saloon. I was always curious about the fact that you've got this very bespoke, old school Scotch bar downstairs, but then the tiki upstairs. Yeah. And now that I speak to you about where you cut your teeth and the places you went, it makes perfect sense that you went with Jack Rose, wooden booths, leather downstairs, and tiki upstairs. You want it all.
Yeah, we did.
Right?
Well, and right behind me, obviously no one can see this, but there's that island which was supposed to be a coffee bar.
Right, yes. And the coffee machine still sits there.
Yeah, but there used to be a really nice, which is now still sitting in my house. I refurbished like a, $6,000 espresso machine, and trained people on it. I wanted to be good at all things like liquid. So we wanted to be, okay, let's have great wine, let's have great cocktails, let's have great spirits, let's do great coffee. I mean, we have to have great coffee. I mean, that's it's a liquid. We just thought, we were thinking that way, that we were going to have this all-encompassing kind of concept. Immediately, coffee was not as big as we thought, so we killed that. We needed the space for other things. We just kept, we kept modifying Jack, especially as we grew whiskey-wise. I mean, it just, when I first opened, we didn't buy any bottle over $130. That was our cap. That was my cap. I was like, if it's over $130, we're not buying it. and we could do it. You could get great whiskeys for under $130. It was crazy.
Why 130? It's very specific.
Budget. I just knew what our budget was, and I knew I had to stretch.
Oh, okay.
I had a lot of whiskey, but in order for us to grow, there was that price point of, under $20 a dram that was really attractive and still is, that we wanted to stay within. So not that I didn't buy other bottles that I just warehouse for myself, but in terms of Jack Rose being able to flip enough money with the partners to keep it growing in a way and keep dividends and payback. We had a lot of money that we spent on the place. I had to get that back to people. So it was kind of an arbitrary number that seemed like a very fair number at the time.
Yeah.
Now $130 wouldn't, that's nothing.
It's not going to work. Josh and I actually just had this in a recent episode where there was there's always an online article, right? But there was an online article that was whiskeys between $150 and $200 that you must own.
Right.
And Josh and I read through it and thought, no, that's just not how this is.
Yeah.
And so we've never done it on the pod before, but we decided, let's do an episode where I bring in 5 whiskeys and you bring in 5 whiskeys, regardless of the price point, and we talk about them. And in looking over my own shelves, I basically trust OBs, distillery bottlings, up to about $80. Maybe between 80 and 100.
Right.
And then as soon as I hit 100, I start looking at independent bottlers, and I start getting single cask at cask strength.
Yeah.
And your eyes immediately lit up when I gave that number.
Yeah.
Was that something you were seeing back in the day? How far was 130 getting you? And then I know that you've got a love of independent bottlers, and Harvey had a love of independent bottlers. What were you seeing around about that price point?
Yeah, I mean, we bought, and if you would have come, and I'm sure you did, when we first opened, I mean, oh my God, all the stuff like Ed Cole was bringing in, all the signatory vintage we could get our hands on, all the Cadenhead we could get our hands on. We had the OBs. They were, mostly diluted, but great expressions, and it sets the tone for the distillery. So you want people to kind of use that. But yeah, we had nothing but stacks of independent bottles. I mean, the great thing is Jack Rose looks very similar now to the way it did in 2011, where we're just buying cases of stuff. We're buying barrels of stuff. And there's just multitudes of the same thing because we love those expressions. And that's where we've landed again, where we're buying as much of a single thing that I'm right now, I'm less worried about building the collection's number as I am having enough of the really good stuff. Because honestly, anybody that thinks that a whiskey bar has to be 2,000 bottles or 5,000 bottles is wrong. What you need is a rotating stock of stuff that you hand selected that is amazing. Who cares about the numbers? It's not a numbers game. I mean, we're going to do it. We'll pursue it because that's who we are. I can't help it. But it's about pursuing the best 3,000 bottles or the best 4,000 bottles or the best 2,000 bottles. It's really hand-selected each one, and that's what's been really fun. So I've been going back and trying to find certain bottles.
Okay.
And Chris and I were talking about a bottle 2 days ago that was here when we first started, which was that Linkwood Octave. 64 bottles ever, right? And we bought every case we could. So when Chris came in and we were training Chris, that has a special place in his heart because that was a fantastic bottle. I remember the same they came out to do was the Linkwood Octave and the Cragmore Octave. And we were getting it so cheap that we were using it, we were turning people on. It was cash strength, Cragmore, heavily sherry, as opposed to Macallan 18. It was like half the price. And we were like, this is phenomenal, right? But then, even if you get 6-8 cases of something, you're pushing it and pushing out the door. I ran into 2 Linkwoods 2 days after the conversation in a liquor store.
Wow.
And they were priced appropriately. They were priced like they were when they came out in 2011.
Wow.
And I was just like, holy shit. So pretty excited. It just got put back on the wall. So we're finding, I've been searching for feeling a little nostalgic of rebuilding, the best collection we can and only from the best product. I mean, obviously single cask strength whiskey is what we've always specialized in, and that's where we want to be. So
I've got literally 5 different questions that I want to ask you all at once here.
Yeah.
Number 1, I know you're a primo hunter. Number 2, I know you've got your spots that you know how to hit up. When you
Yeah.
could walk into, you didn't just walk into any old liquor store and there were these 2 bottles. You knew where you were walking into.
Yeah, I'm spending about $2,000 a week there.
Okay, there you go. So I know you've got that going on. For a period, were you chasing the number of bottles? Was it a good marketing tool? As they're talking about, over the last decade, we've seen the rise of whiskey bars globally.
Right.
And one of those shortcuts is, oh, they've got 3,000, 3,500
Yeah.
open bottles.
Yeah.
Right? That's a good shortcut.
Yes.
Did you chase that for a bit? Because I know you still had a wonderful collection. There weren't any cheapies on the shelf.
No. We did chase. We were chasing it. It was a sign, a badge, and you wanted to be the best whiskey bar and the biggest whiskey bar, but there's no point in being the biggest if you're not the best. So we definitely chased a number, but also that kind of like, we were hitting like milestones weekly, and I think it was more that all of a sudden people started coming at us like, oh, we have this or we have that.
Yes.
And I just like, it just became kind of a competition, which I think pushed consciousness forward of whiskey being, oh my God, there's a lot. And you can go to the West Coast, you can go to the East Coast, you can go up to the Northeast, down to the South. So I think that momentary thing of like people chasing numbers, and it's one thing if it's a good person chasing numbers, it's a bad thing if it's a bad person or someone who doesn't have whiskey experience. And that's what we started to see was there was a few top people chasing numbers, and you were like, okay, I want to go see what they're doing. They're chasing numbers, but they probably have excellent palates. They've been in the game for a long time. They know what they're doing. That's fun. If you have people competing that know what they're doing, it's fun.
Yeah.
But then you just had people jumping in and throwing out numbers that when I looked at their lists, I was just like, they have more whiskey than we do, but we don't carry 75% of what's on their list and wouldn't carry 75% of what they're, and then you're just like, this has gotten nuts. So I guess it was maybe 4 years ago, in every interview I started going, numbers mean nothing, stop it. You guys are, first of all, to anybody who's asked me, and I've had plenty of people call me from Canada to here, to the South, to the West, saying, we want to open a whiskey bar. And I say, don't do it. To just say I'm going to open up a whiskey bar, it's very cash intensive. If you don't have a great palate or you don't know what you're doing, you're just going to put a lot of dead inventory up on the shelf, and you're ultimately going to go bankrupt. I was like, if you have a penchant for whiskey, then be a great bar that happens to have a lot of great whiskey.
Oh, interesting.
And that's been Mike Miller's philosophy from the beginning. I was
thinking
right?
Mike Miller when you said that.
Mike's fantastic. It's a Mike Miller bar, and we're different. We have totally 2 different styles. We've always been the best friends and best frenemies out there because we're competing in a way that pushes things forward because we collaborate, we talk about each other. We celebrate each other's selections, and there's great things there that aren't here, and vice versa. So I love that. Mike's the kind of guy that I always say is my stock answer. If I wasn't drinking in my own bar, I would fly to Chicago and drink at his. Yeah, that's it for me. But yeah, the whiskey in the hands of good. Whiskey in the hands of evil, bad. I don't know.
So when I first met you, it would have been 2012. I moved to Virginia the summer of 2012. I was introduced to you and Harvey, and one of the very first things I was told about Jack Rose is we're looking to get as much as we can, 50% alcohol and above.
Yes.
And if we have to do 48, 46, we understand. What we are going to try and avoid is 43 and 40.
Yes.
And how well did you do with that?
Well, it was, depending upon which style, if you're looking at Scotch, it is easier than bourbon in terms of there's a lot of stuff that comes out of, there's still a lot of stuff in the bourbon world that is on the lower side, 90, 94, right? Scotch, you can actually, because you've had 100 amazing distilleries distilling for hundreds of years, you can find enough expressions from a distillery to meet that goal, right? There's enough vintage product out there. With bourbon, you may not be able to do that. If you don't carry a lot of the OBs, you're not going to have a very good selection of stuff. And it is stuff that people would like to drink. So it was more difficult on the bourbon side. With Scotch, it was much easier to follow that pattern. Obviously, there's a few exceptions. that I think if everybody hears our pause, if you don't know the distillery I'm talking about, that went the opposite way, as we, kept pushing. And when Harvey and I first got together, we got brought together by this guy, Matuszewski, because he knew we were both super cash strength people. And Harvey was actually buying the Willett family estate releases that I was putting out. So he was buying them. He was buying all my early ones. And Matt's like, you guys have to meet. So it was a love of cash strength whiskey and higher proof stuff. Now, that being said, there's plenty of, diluted whiskey that is phenomenal. And we are still tasting, especially with some age on it, right? I mean, some of that is closer to natural cash strength, with a lot of age than would be something younger. So it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, we will try something this, and all those Murray McDavid stuff that they did all the finishes that were 92, I think it was, back in the day. There's some really good stuff. And I bought 2 off the shelf the other day, some Glenrothes from the mid 2000s that I fall sitting on the shelf, and I'm like, I have to take these. These were great drams, and they're and that stuff was 80. That Glenrothes stuff, I believe, wasn't it?
Wow.
Weren't those grenade bottles? Did they?
Oh gosh,
change? I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, I can't even tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So you've made your name in a host of ways, but you're known for bourbon, the bar. You're known for your love of American spirits. You're known for your hunting, and then you do Jack Rose with this predominantly Scotch focus to it. Am I correct in saying you had a predominantly Scotch focus when you opened Jack Rose?
No, we actually still had. I'm trying to think at the beginning how the bourbon stacked up to the Scotch. It was probably pretty close. Scotch was the first time that we had done a tremendous focus on Scotch. Bourbon was still taking off.
Okay.
I mean,
sure.
It was
very much so. Yes.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of people that were into it. It was getting slightly harder, but Scotch was far more expensive. So to do a heavy Scotch bar was a great call. I mean, it's a calling card that was like, okay, there's plenty of Scotches out there that were already $2,000 bottles, whereas bourbon, a $2,000 bottle was like, what? It didn't exist. So I think that, the Scotch selection, due to the fact that it was so expensive to drink Scotch, or what seemed to be so expensive to drink Scotch, really kind of took off. That fact that switched within a 2-year period. It wasn't long before bourbon. And here's the other problem with the bourbon is we had an amazing bourbon collection, but we had a lot of depth on a lot of great bottles, but the breadth of stuff wasn't as intense.
Yes.
With the bourbon market. So it was, I think the first time that, it was a huge success of merging the two together in kind of a harmony, because it was so funny because in the early days, you had your bourbon guys coming in, you had your Scotch guys coming in, or Scotch people, bourbon people. And it was like 2 different camps. But now they are one camp. Like, the average whiskey drinker is so sophisticated now, they're less likely to turn their nose up at an expression, whether it be Scotch, bourbon, or rye, when recommended by somebody they trust.
Yes.
So I think that there's been a complete, over the last decade, education in whiskey drinking, and I think that we've truly kind of helped that along. I think we've educated a lot of people in terms of that, you shouldn't look at whiskey being, one style. You should just look at, whiskey as a group and then an experiment. And then the whiskey maker and the distillery. So we no longer have regions. Nothing is set up by region anymore. Right? We have said now, you must, just as I say you should trust the independent bottler. If they are selecting casks, trust them. Mm-hmm. Whether it be bourbon, whether it be Armagnac, whether it be single malts. Mm-hmm. When a distillery has decided to do a peated style, an unpeated style, a sherry finish, a port, you trust the distiller. There's so much that goes into making wood. I should go making wood. Making whiskey.
There's a lot that goes into making wood also.
Exactly. There's so much that goes into making whiskey, especially on the bourbon side, that a mash bill's grain percentage switching by 5 degrees or 5 points is maybe on the lower side of importance. Who the distiller is, who the stills, what wood management, what warehousing, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to look at a whiskey drinker and say, you should drink bourbon over rye or rye over bourbon, that's not the case. You should drink these ryes over these bourbons over these ryes, these single malts over these bourbons over these single malts, because of who made them, or this is a magical cask, or whatever.
Yes.
To really simplify it down to it just being a grain proposition is too simplistic.
Interesting.
We have to think of it as who's the producer, who is selecting these casks, what has been your experience. And I'm not saying that if you tried Smoky Peaty stuff and you're like, I don't like it, oh my God, we just need to go on a new journey. We have to start with Bunnahabhain, or we have to start with the slightly peated that we're drinking today from Kilchoman.
Yes.
There's no absolutes in the whiskey world. There's no absolutes with a distillery. You just need to start trusting and trying. And I think that's where Jack Rose has moved into a new phase of just it being about the entire process and making sure that people understand that nothing is simple, everything is complex, and there's gradations of quality, and really start to discover the entire process and what goes into the bottle, and then start again and go on an educated journey with people you trust.
This is fascinating. I've got so many questions, but I'm going to pause you here.
Oh, can I say that part of that?
Please.
So when we talked about this, I mean, we had been talking about this for a while, because we really get into process. But it something also that you said one day when you brought over that single cask nation Glenfarclas with Glenfarclas beautifully written on there. It's one of my. I think I'll probably keep that bottle when it's empty because I love the way that Glenfarclas is across the single cask nation. Right? I mean, it's awesome. Yeah. It's a splash, the splash of color, and if you were to call Glenfarclas, they would say I'm a Highland distillery, right? Mm-hmm. But they've arbitrarily put into this new category called Speyside, and vatted whiskey is no longer vatted whiskey. Now it's blended, and what is in a name? It's what is in a bottle, and that really kind of it's just like, wait a minute, we are putting far too much importance on a geographical reference that somebody arbitrarily put. We need to look at the distillery. It's all about the distiller, the distillery, the management, the people there. So
we talk about people all the time.
That's
all
it.
the time.
So we just want to be that. We want to be part of the learning process, be part of the final process. The last thing.
And that's exactly the question I want to ask you is, for so long, we accepted regions as a great way to educate the newcomer to the category. You run a bar, you're dependent on dollar bills coming out of pockets and wallets, and you're okay walking away from the regions. Are you taking on more education with the consumer, or are you taking on different education with the consumer?
I think it's a combination of both. I think we're taking on more education in the sense that they're going to look at us and say, I don't like Islay. And I think that naturally is going to beg the question with our staff of, well, why don't you like Islay? Would you be willing to go on a quick journey? I mean, I think our staff is, Chris, Brittany, Joey, Christian, like all these people. God, have I missed anyone? I want to make sure.
It's dangerous when you start listing.
Yeah. These are accomplished whiskey people. They know that they can easily recommend a great whiskey for you. You just have to be open. And that's the great thing is, and we joked, and we before COVID, and I'm sure it'll be again, we used to call this the International Locals Bar. Because so many people fly in to come here, people that are in town for only a month, or they're at their embassy, or people coming on vacation, they come here, they'll spend 1 or 2 nights drinking here. They might go to dinner, then drink here. They might spend 1 night at dinner, then drink here. I've had people stay a week. I had a couple once hand me a list. They showed up. They're like, we're going to be here for the next 3 days. Here's a 2-page list of every whiskey we want to drink. Is that possible? And I looked at their list and I said, I will make sure every whiskey on this list is here over the next 72 hours. And I did it. And they did. They micro-drammed.
Yes.
We made it approachable for them so they could try all of these whiskeys without breaking the bank for full ounces or 2 ounces, but going half ounce, quarter ounce, whatever. They were true, great people that wanted to try, and I wanted to accommodate them however we
That's
however we
very
could.
cool, Bill. That really is very cool.
So in that sense, yes, we are taking on an educational role. We'll probably do a lot more tastings. We'll probably, be pushing this philosophy a lot more simply because there's so many great distilleries across the world now. To dismiss anyone based on region or location is just insane to me. And I think we're all it's just a natural progression of whiskey that there's a million different styles out there, and distilleries make multiple different styles within the distillery, and you just have to believe in people and what they're doing. So
how do you build a menu? We're so used to walking into a whiskey bar, we get the menu, it's by region, and then it's got regions of Scotland, then regions of the world.
now it'll be alphabetical by distillery.
Okay.
So great. So now, when I tell people that Colila makes an amazing unpeated spirit, they're going to hear this podcast. There'll be more people that hear your podcast that come in here and are willing to take a journey.
For sure.
This is the first time I've talked about this publicly on what we're doing.
Thank you.
And we've been moving this direction for quite some time, and it was just, finally, with COVID being here, it's given us the time to reorganize our thoughts, to reorganize the collection, to stock the collection with the way that we'd like to. Single Cask Nation has their own section now, which is happened during COVID.
Thank you.
All right? I mean,
thank you.
And it was great because, there's a whole row of stuff, and I stare at that Glenfarclas, all the time because I love the bottle.
Well, the good news is that is the Glenfarclas label. Only George Grant has that label. Not just because it's got Glenfarclas, but because it's also the old style.
Yeah.
And only George Grant has that label.
It's fantastic.
So we are working on more Glenfarclas with him, but there's COVID and there's moving at the speed of Scotland.
Yeah.
And then there's moving at the speed of Scotland during COVID.
And our bottle has like maybe 25-30% left, I think. So we're in desperate need of another bottle of Glenfarclas Single Cask Nation.
It was a cracker. I even sold you one from my own collection when you were pivoting during COVID.
Yeah, and that's the one that's up there.
That's why I sold it to you.
Yeah. We listen. When we had to rebuild this collection, I had to sell off a lot of stuff that I did not want to, and B, I had to ask a lot of people to, what do you have in your closet that you can part with that will get in drinkers' hands?
Yep.
Will not go into a collection to collect dust.
Yep.
It will actually get out there and be drunk.
Yep. No, I was so happy to be able to do that. You've done so much for Single Cask Nation, over the 8-9 years we've known each other.
Yeah.
You've been such a tremendous supporter. Yeah. When COVID hit and you pivoted, and it was very worrying watching announcements where you just started selling off the Jack Rose collection, but then you also, am I right in saying this? You also started selling off your own collection to support your employees at Jack Rose?
Yeah, I sold it off for, we sold the collection within Jack Rose, which really helped us get us over the hump initially with employees because we didn't pull back on the reins in the immediate aftermath of being closed. So we dug quite a hole in salaries and hourlies and stuff like that because you anticipate those. I think the average restaurant and bar, which you've got to move away from, is operating in a deficit at all times.
I was going to ask you this question.
And all of a sudden, when the spigot gets turned off, you're 30 days behind.
Yep.
So you have to immediately, the most important thing is getting everyone whole and then planning for the future. So I had... And then we had just opened up a new restaurant of which we had some people that put their investments down, family members from all the different partners that had no savings. They put their savings in because they believed in us, and now we have no way to repay you. So, the collection we sold in here was very pivotal in getting everyone whole. And then I started selling my outside collection as a way to, get all the investors who needed their money back immediately so they would feel secure, to get them paid off, and also supplement keeping this place afloat during those early months. Plus, we were doing 2 bags of groceries every Wednesday for every employee.
Oh, wow.
So every Wednesday we got to see every employee. Why in that initial shutdown, that first 3 or 4 months, when we had no employment whatsoever, we were just trying to keep them afloat, making sure that they all, and we got to meet with them, and if somebody needed a few bucks here or there, whatever, anything we could do to keep everybody going, and then immediately getting them everyone staffed up and back on payroll very quickly.
Wow.
When we had jobs, when we had actual work. And then we kept healthcare going the whole time. So no one had to worry about paying for healthcare.
That's brilliant.
So we did that, and it cost a lot of money to do that. So I sold off a significant amount of my collection to do that. But then again, I had people calling me and saying, I've got bottles to sell, because they know, and I was like, well, okay, let's buy. So I was, we were, buying stuff and then selling stuff in the bottle shop, and then putting the, stuff that we need on the shelf. And it, I had enough time that I was able to buy and sell to rebuild. By the end of May, there was 0 bottles, not one bottle on any shelf in Jack Rose. Now we're sitting here staring at, there's roughly just what we're staring at around the room. There's probably 2,500 bottles.
Okay.
And we're sitting underneath the booth. There's another couple hundred buried, so.
When you're talking there about time, one of the things that nobody knew was, what's this even going to look like? How long term were the decisions you were making? Were you just like, this will get us through this week?
Yes.
This will get the staff through this week. This will get us from Wednesday to Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the place you were in.
We were in the place that every week was,
fucking hell.
What do I do to survive this week? What do I sell to survive this week? Who is out there who will buy, without losing a ton of money? I mean, there's one thing, and the people that waited in line and bought Jack Rose's inventory, everyone got a significant deal. Like, I had actually already put my house, I had already contacted real estate. I was emptying my house because I thought that was the go next. Okay, I'll sell the house. We'll bring in that revenue. That'll keep us afloat. Those first early days of the consumers coming, our patrons showing up and buying bottles, gave me enough breathing room in the first week to kind of pull back a little bit and say, okay, does the house need to sell? I just continued to okay, I'm going to keep anticipating I'm going to sell the house, but is it going to be reality? Which it wasn't. Obviously, I still have my house, thank God.
Grief, man.
But yeah, that was the reality, that the house had to go. We had, we had one large buyer out of New York, a private individual who was generous and purchased part of my collection for his own use, not to sell and flip, but honestly, I think he likes to give very good gifts. So there's people out there that are going to get some really great stuff. So he was really came at a perfect time, kind of an angel buyer. But then again, I had the people that called me that sold me amazing product and just crazy bottles that I was just like, wow, thank you. First edition of this, first edition of this, first edition of this. And I paid them a great sum for them, but man, we got them back. We got really cool stuff. And then we bought, I've been tucking away stuff, like Chip Tate balconies that were at every collection. So one day when Chip gets his new place open, we'll do, I'll get him in here, I hope, and we'll do a tasting with Chip, and we'll say, hey, this is what he did back in the day, and this is what he's doing now. And so we've just been I've been, early Compass box stuff, been stashing that away for getting a Glacier Tate. So we're now thinking, we were already thinking 100 years out. Now we're really going crazy. We're thinking madness. And I still have all the first edition single cask nations that are not up there, so we can do a crazy anniversary tasting or whatever.
We'll be here. We'll bring some more.
That Kilhoman 5, that Lecheg, that Lafroig. Oh my God, I still have those. So we'll do a crazy taste. So I think we're going to be very event-driven and celebratory driven in the future. Just celebrating whiskey and what it's meant to us and all these milestones.
Well, and you'd already started that thing. You'd had your Premier Drams event. You'd had 2 of those. And I'm very honored to say I was a part of the first and the second.
Yes.
I even, as much as I live 2 hours down the road, I flew in to be at the second event. And then I flew in from Seattle, came here the Saturday morning,
right.
Sunday morning, whichever day you...
Sunday,
right? I did the Sunday morning event here, and then I drove back to the airport and flew on to Scotland.
That's crazy.
Just so that I could support that event, which I wouldn't even think twice about supporting. And so, in a good way. That's, I think, sometimes used as a bad expression. I wouldn't think twice about crossing the street to help you. Is a bad thing. And so, Premier Drams, obviously the third.
Right.
We lost to COVID.
Yep.
The fourth, in the same kind
Yep.
of time of year, we've already lost to COVID.
Yeah.
Do you see that coming back later this year? Do you want to do that spring of next year? Or do you just want to turn it into ongoing events that pour great things?
I don't know. We're definitely going to bring back Premier Drams. When it will be and in what fashion. I mean, it was literally, I think, the best value in whiskey drinking in the world, simply because when we didn't ask any of the participating distilleries or independent bottlers or anybody to put up we just said, bring really good stuff that people want to drink.
Yep.
That's how, and it really showed, because everybody came with A game, and it was amazing. And it was, we limited the amount of people in here, so it wasn't too crowded. And it was like a cocktail party for whiskey where you just saw people grabbing something, walking over. You'd see 5 people that don't know each other talking about a dram, and then you got to try this, because there was too much good whiskey that you could you could drink. You couldn't drink.
Yes.
What was here? All cash strength. It was either, the tagline was cash strength. Was it cash strength, vintage, or new? It had to be something new. So if you had launched, if Abalor had launched something new, and they wouldn't do, sure, we'll do it. But other than that, it was, just really mostly cash strength, expressions.
Well, it's the type of event, if I wasn't pouring at it, I would drive the 2 hours up the road to attend it.
Yeah.
I can't give a better compliment than that.
Yes. And I approach it from the same direction. I go, would I buy this ticket? And and especially with my access, it takes a lot for me to be like, is it worth it for me? And if it's worth it for me, then I know it's worth it for the consumer.
And that's why I like the remit of, you don't have to buy your space, you just have to bring good stuff to pour. And my mindset was, if somebody came to my house, what would I pour for them?
Right.
That's what I'm going to take to Jack Rose.
Yeah.
And so then as I'm standing up in my spot pouring for people, I found what you were talking about. 5 and 6 people would gather around and we would talk.
Yeah.
And we would talk about that dram. Oh, you like that one?
Right.
Have this dram. And then, I don't want to take up too much of your time or take up too many of your pours.
Yeah.
But if you would indulge me a third,
Yeah.
I think you might enjoy this, given that you've enjoyed those 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how I pour for people in my house.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so to pour for people like that at Jack Rose was easy peasy and an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. And the blind tasting station was a lot of fun for people too. We started doing that at the first Premier Drams, and Kelly Carmack from, God, I know I'm going to screw this up, either Women Who Whiskey or DC Women of Whiskey, but she won the first one and came in second or third on the second time.
Nice.
She's pretty awesome. So it was great, and it was such an eclectic group of people. We always the first thing we train people at Jack Rose is, if you think you know what a whiskey drinker looks like, you don't. So if you get sent over to a table because they ask for a whiskey advisor, and you try to eye up, the 50-year-old guy or the 75-year-old, white guy sitting there, and you turn to them and go, "I heard you need a whiskey advisor," and they're sitting with their, 21-year-old daughter, and she's like, "I'm the whiskey person. He's drinking IPAs, or he's drinking it's nuts. You can't tell. There is no true image of a whiskey drinker anymore. It can be anyone. Don't make the mistake of ever thinking, you're going to figure it out. Well, everyone is.
And let me give the compliment to your attendees. They would be bringing me drams as well.
Yes.
And they would say, "Give me your glass," and we'd go off and pour for me and say, "Given what we drank with you here, you need to be tasting this from this other table."
Yeah.
And it was always brilliant as well. So kudos on that. I'm excited. The reason I'm asking you about it is because I'm excited for it to come back.
Yeah, we're
I'm
pretty
excited to come back and support it again.
Yeah, and I think it'll be even better. My biggest problem is, we only allowed 16 people to showcase their stuff, and I know that there's a lot more than 16 that want to do it now.
Sure.
For sure. And back then I just called all the people who I knew were big supporters of us in the industry, and that's how I said, "Hey, would you guys do it?" And everyone did. So obviously I'm going to call them first, and say, "Hey, would you mind doing it again?" And obviously you guys are big supporters. Wilderness Trail was big supporters. Drew, who doesn't do any shows. I mean, Willett has been fantastic. A lot of great. It was a great mix of American and Scotch.
Yes.
It's just a great mix.
Yep.
And we did cocktails. We had a couple cocktail stations.
Oh, okay.
So we did have a couple. So if you wanted to, I don't know, we're not pitching Premier Drams. I don't even know what it's going to be. So I feel like I just was going on in. And
I was just watching because
you get a free pin.
You did that dangerous thing again when you start making a list.
Yeah.
And then one thing we know about lists is not everyone's on it. And then people read between the lines. There's two things that I want to ask you about, and then I know we got to get out of here because you are the busiest man that I know. Number one, you pivoted during COVID to a bottle shop that's been incredibly successful, which has also included, I know you did it with the bar, I know you've done it even more with the bottle shop, of your own barrel picks. And then I want to talk a little bit about the future. And you did mention this a moment ago, where we now know the business model for how you operate an eatery and a drinkery and potentially a dancery. Basement for haberdashery. Like, we know it's not a sustainable model, and yet people have been doing it for decade upon decade upon decade. So I want to come back to you and get your mind on what you think the future holds. But first things first, you pivoted to a bottle shop. What did that look like? How quickly did that happen in the pandemic? And what does the future hold even for your bottle shop?
We pivoted as fast as the mayor put the new law into effect, which is very quickly. I mean, there's nothing more resilient than a small business person. I mean, they ups and downs. They're used to it. They give it. If you give them the tools, they're very creative. They're creative. That's why they got into it. I mean, they're all creative. She gave us an opportunity that really spoke to us, which was the bottle shop, and it was life-saving for us. I mean, being able to do that, it gave us work for people. It created a tremendous amount of revenue. We were already working on pushing that direction with the ABC board prior to COVID. It was something that we were probably already going to get into. The only thing was now it's for the whole city. A lot of people can do it, whereas I was trying to push for a pilot program through us to get it going, because there's so many great restaurants and bars, even if it's a small ethnic restaurant, whether it be Ethiopian or Greek or something, that wants to celebrate wines or a particular spirit from their country, and yet they educate you, and then there's either no place to buy it or they're not getting a percentage of that sale, and that's really annoying. So really, by this new aspect of the ABC law, which is allowing restaurants and bars to sell directly to consumer, allows all of the hard work and training that went into the staff and then was put, given to the customer. It gives them an opportunity to monetize that. So it's truly a game changer for Washington, D.C. I really think it's going to be fun I hope that a lot of smaller restaurants, and especially ethnic restaurants, take advantage of it.
It's on the books to stay?
It's on the books to stay. You just had to file your paperwork by a certain date, and you were automatically grandfathered in.
Wow.
Permanently.
Okay.
Now, you can get it after the fact, but you will be subject to local ANCs, neighborhood groups. They'll be able to weigh in.
Oh, okay.
Before, you were just, and it showed to be not. It's so funny that everybody gets concerned about change, but then something like the pandemic happens and you see how responsible people are, right? And then the people could have a cocktail outside and be in control.
Yeah.
It's like, if you give them some freedom, we haven't seen the abusiveness.
Drives me fucking bonkers when we always build it based on the most negative, not based on the most positive.
Yes.
And then you see great positives coming from human beings.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have a horrible neighborhood group, one of the neighborhood associations, not our ANC. Our ANC is fantastic, but one of our neighborhood groups that's always about the worst case scenario. We need to stop you before you start because the worst can happen. And we have seen through this, everything that they hated and fought pre-pandemic, has been allowed during pandemic, and it's been just amazing. And we've really had, it's kept restaurants and bars afloat. It's also what the pandemic did show is how, especially in this community in DC, where the hospitality second largest employer after the federal government, how important we are, and how many people. Whether then it flows down to the trucking companies and the distributors, how important we are, and how many jobs and how many kind of careers were put at risk due to COVID. So I think that hopefully it's educated a lot of neighborhood people on, these great restaurants and bars are really the backbone of a lot of communities, and they'll look at us a little differently and be open-minded. That's not to say all, but I'm saying there are a few more older, established, outlived their time, their usefulness here, that need to either wake up or go away.
I've never seen you choose your words this carefully. I was like watching that live.
I could have gone just because when you watch so many. Listen, we have fared so well during COVID. We've kept our staff on. We're looking forward to a double Christmas party, or excuse me, holiday party, which will be debauchery, and I just can't wait to get everyone in the same room and have a drink. Mm-hmm. We've kept the family atmosphere. I think we've stepped up as best we could. I think a lot of people did the same. I know Gina over Buffalo and Bergen. I know she did a lot for her staff. I think there's a lot of people that did the most they could during COVID, and they need to be celebrated, and people need to recognize how hard it was to do that. So I don't know where I was going with this other than I just want to drink with my staff at a holiday party. That's it. So.
Well, and you and I were talking before we hit record here that the mask mandate was just lifted a week ago. And the fact that folk can now, I don't quite know what capacity is like at the stadium that we mentioned, the stadium earlier on as well. But people now have permission from the CDC to come out and be present again. And you and I are sitting here. I didn't walk in with a mask on. You didn't greet me with a mask on. We're not talking with masks on, or we are 6 feet apart, but that's just because I didn't have a chance to shower before I left the house today. Do you think people are going to embrace the going out again? Are people going to be shoulder to shoulder at the bar again? Do you think there's going to be a period of caution as people dip their toe back into the thing that they desperately want?
We saw about a 35% increase over our COVID numbers. Now, we're still a far cry from our pre-COVID numbers.
I'm with you.
But we actually, on Saturday night, apparently I was not here, but had a small line, which we hadn't seen since way pre-COVID.
Sure.
But that's because right now we're running about 65% capacity, 70%, simply for two reasons. One, we're redoing our systems. We don't have the staffing that we need. Unfortunately, we lost some of the best and the brightest during COVID to going out and seeking other employment outside of the hospitality industry.
Sure.
We had a lot of people that chose to move back to their, where their parents live, to be closer to family. So there was an exodus from our industry because of uncertainty that we are not going to get back, which has left, a lot of places short-staffed, and quite honestly was among our most talented individuals. So losing that top tier, we have to train new people. We have to get them. So we couldn't go back to 100%.
Gotcha.
So we weren't shoulder to shoulder. We were running about 70%. I don't know what to expect over the next few months in terms of will we get back to packed? I think it'll be a little cautious. I think we'll get back to 70%. That being said, I think we'll probably over the next 3 months have to maintain 70% because none of us are going to have our people in place. So I think it's probably a good natural. Now, will we have enough revenue coming in that without any additional stimulus dollars or help from the banks in terms of mortgages or rents or landlords that we're going to be in trouble? I'm not sure about that. That is the one thing that concerns me is the fact that getting a bump of 20 or 30% over your current COVID numbers still may not be enough to survive. So I think I think that people are going to look and say, oh, look, Jack Rose had a 10-person line on Saturday night to get in, but we still probably weren't profitable simply because of the amount of staff that we've kept on, and the rent going up. So I think there could be the visual that, bars and restaurants are back, but we're not back. We're not even close to back. We are, Saturday night, we ran about, I'd say I know the final numbers, and we were 65% of what a normal Saturday night was. But it's that last 30% that counts.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's
not the first 70% breaks even maybe.
Difference between cost and margin.
Yeah, we're not close, and I'm afraid that there's a dark period ahead in terms of if they lay off the gas I'm looking for landlords and banks to defer a little bit longer or to reduce and give us a little more breathing room so we can start to ramp up. And I think, once again, we're in better position than most. So I'm really speaking, there's a lot of small people out there that still could be really hurt by people thinking that, oh, we're good. We're not good.
Well, just while we're here, do you think the consumer is in a better place to better support this type of business now? If you think about where food profits lie, and we heard from some of the places in New York that they were really operating on 2% margins up in New York.
Right.
And that, my hair was already grey, but it would have gone grey in reading that.
Yeah.
And yet meals already seem to be so expensive.
Right.
Or tipping or minimum wage, which is so relevant right now.
Yeah.
Do you think the consumer has seen an industry go to the wall and is now saying, wow, we really do need to rethink how we pay our bills, how we support our staffs that we go in and frequent?
Yeah, I mean, I am rethinking how we do everything in terms of, and I said this, I was saying this even almost a year ago. I was like, when this is all over, in a few years, people are going to walk into restaurants and bars and go, oh, this place was set up pre-COVID. There'll be a layout. There'll be an access to, say, to-go windows. There'll be where the kitchen's located. People will design, and I know I would if I was designing a new restaurant or bar, I would design it based on the worst case scenario of if I had to pivot, what should the place look like? And also, keeping to go, we didn't do a lot of to go pre-COVID. Having the ability to go food, to go cocktails, to go whiskey, that's here to stay. So we'll keep that as a profit center so we can always pivot. There's got to be a thinking holistically of how we pivot our staff into other avenues, other revenue streams that keep the restaurant in place and keep them employed, and also having reserves. I think a restaurant that's not thinking about having, I know for us, we've got to build up at least $500,000 reserve to make sure that we can weather this without incident and make sure that people are taken care of. I watched another financial show last night. Went down this rabbit hole of, how pensions and 401ks and blah, blah, blah. How do we create a company that can, one, have the employees be able to grow with you? How do we create a company that challenges them to want to grow? And how do we create something that they could work for 20, 30, or 40 years and move on? Because obviously in this industry, it's more of a young person's game.
Yep.
You're on your feet a lot, late hours. I'm 50. What does that look like for me? What does that look like for our management staff? I mean, how do we do this? And we were already thinking that way. This has truly accelerated it. And, I have a huge task ahead of me to create the kind of company that I would want to work for. So, it's going to be difficult. Next couple of years, I think are really pivotal for companies. And I think people are going to look at it and say, why would I want to be in this industry when there's no room for growth, when there's no stability? I think that people need to be asking themselves that questions, which is going to force companies to ask themselves that question so they can maintain the level of professional that we were moving to. The great professional bartender, the chef, these people that are really lifers in our industry. The COVID could have set us back dramatically unless we do something individually and start getting that message out there that companies are looking to be progressive in terms of how they treat their staffs and how they fund things going forward. It could be far more devastating. So there's already friends that are they're going back to school. They went back to school.
Yes.
During COVID in anticipation of still leaving. We have one employee right now who's getting ready to leave us, has been with us. He wasn't even with us during COVID. We hired him during COVID because we needed an extra break. And now before COVID's over, in another 2 weeks, now COVID's over, in another couple of weeks, he's leaving us because he got training all during COVID.
Wow.
And it's gone. And to see someone that talented, who I'd love to work with, to see them leave the industry simply because they just don't see a future.
It's a hell of a task you've got in front of you, but I think it's going to be true of other places as well. The one that got me in what you just said there was, had the industry previously operated with rainy day funds? Like you already talked about operating within a deficit. You've got those 30-day terms that you're just working to get those paid off. A rainy day fund seems like a luxury that wouldn't have been discussed or wouldn't have been in place. Is that the case?
I think for smaller companies, yeah. For some mom and pops, really small that are family run and operated, they have a different, they're they probably have reserves because, everything goes back to the family. And maybe the bigger corporations like hotel bars and restaurants and stuff, they were getting propped up by huge corporations. Then anybody in that mid-level, probably not. Probably no rainy day fund. And, what I had as our rainy day fund was, 8,000 whiskey bottles.
Right.
That I could tap into. So in a sense, I mean, we had one, but that was to carry us with great whiskey for the next 20 or 30 years. Now, that's a bit different. So, but I that also means you're going to have to, and I've always been a big proponent of owning your space, and I still am. I think small business people have to own their own real estate.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that way they can tap into that resource if they need to. They need to, be aggressive if you can, 15-year fix, so you build up some equity, so you can tap into that when something like this happens. And so you can weather the ups and downs of the market and stick true to your core values by owning the property. And maybe getting to a point where you no longer have rent, that all you have is your property taxes and basic operating costs. So if you're thinking long term, you should be thinking, how do I, no matter what you do, how do I own my own building? How do I tap that as a resource when things go bad? How do I tap that, or how do I stay true to being, if whiskey went out of fashion, which it never will, would I want to stay a whiskey bar if nobody's coming in? Well, that's my passion, so it's not changing. So, we just have to think long term, and that means landlords have to be progressive. Don't get in with a wrong landlord. Sign long. It's always that one thing, that rule of thumb. Sign the shortest lease at the lowest rate with the most options. You want that. Obviously, landlords don't want that. They want a lot of times they want to either tie you into a 10-year lease so they can, especially in developing areas, they want to tie you into a lease where you're covering their nut while everything goes up. And then as soon as everything gets great, they want to jack your rent. The whole point of going into developing market is getting the lower rate, and you should be able to buy your building. That's what you want. You want to be the person on the other side of that, not let a landlord be on the other side of that.
That makes perfect sense. So. Absolute perfect sense. I'm trying to wrap up the interview because I'm so cognizant of your time and you needing to move on to the next thing, and you keep raising questions for me to ask questions about. There's going to be a part two. I'm not going to get to ask you all my questions.
Yeah, with some of the things we outlined at the beginning, right? we haven't even gotten to.
Right, we've barely scratched the surface here, but I really appreciate your time. I'd be remiss if I didn't pivot back to your barrel selections.
Okay.
Because I've purchased them from you, and I've purchased you mentioned Mike Miller earlier on. I've got a bottle of the Delilah's Jack Rose collaboration Kilchoman.
Right.
I've got some new riff that I picked up from you earlier this year that you had in the bottle shop. And I also picked up your Jack Rose lightly peated Kilchoman, 1X bourbon, 1X sherry. And you and I talked about this on the phone just a couple of weeks ago. That ex-bourbon, lightly peated Kilchoman single cask is absolutely phenomenal. And I make no bones about it on the podcast. I've got plenty of Kilchoman to be keeping me busy. It's one that I've started reaching for of an evening.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to end, but I do want to enjoy it.
Yes, absolutely.
And I keep pouring it. What are you, on the other hand, I'm also an independent bottler who comes to you and tries to sell you single casks of bottled goods.
Right.
You're doing the thing that I'm doing in different ways. What are you looking for when you're picking a barrel?
Oh, wow. I mean, you're looking for something interesting and unique, obviously, but something that's, it can't just be different and unique. It's got to be a great whiskey, and it's got to be, obviously we're looking at it from nose to finish. Mm-hmm. We're looking for a complete whiskey, often a lot of the whiskeys that I've picked over the years have been described as more lush, as being
Interesting.
Especially on the bourbon side, really big mid palates and stuff like that. But I think that's also a lot of people mistaking the fact in the old days that they weren't drinking cask strength. They weren't, single barrel. So you have that weightiness that comes with most cask strength or expressions. So in many ways, I think that that descriptor, although I think it is good, is a lot of people's first introduction into that in a single barrel cask strength. Just looking for that completeness. I mean, you want it to, the nose has got to be, score high, the palate, the balance, the finish. You want it to be, when you're dealing with certain casks that we can't get very often, you're looking for something that maybe from a bigger distillery, something that's slightly off character for them, right? I mean, you're not looking for the same old thing, just cask strength. You're looking for something that shows a little more breadth and range from that distillery. So if it comes down to, wow, this is so on point for what someone would consider their profile, and this one is just as equally great but is not, you're going to go that direction. You want to show the variance in distilleries, because a lot of times if they're doing blending or doing small batches or whatever, you lose some of that, obviously, individual qualities of a single cask. So obviously looking for something that's different and unique, but celebrates the distillery itself in some way, something well-rounded, something big. Obviously, single barrel, cask strength, non-chill filtered, wherever you can do, whenever that ability presents itself. And then if not, and it's something that's a barrel program that maybe one of the bigger houses has that has to be on point with their dilution, 90, 94, or whatever, you're looking for something as unique as possible. Obviously, you're not bothering to try it at cask strength. You want to try it at its diluted because you're looking for something that's going to be that character when the consumer gets it, not, something that, is, completely different than when you tried it in the rick house. So being mindful. And we've turned down a lot of single casks during COVID, which is nuts. And that would sell because we can put Jack Rose on something and it will sell. But that's not our mission. If I put my name on it or Jack Rose's name on it or share it with I want it to be just as good as, if I help someone else pick barrels, And I just want it to be the best expression of a distillery, what a distillery can do. So
I love that answer. I love the focus on the distillery. Is there a part of your mind where you're thinking the consumer? Are you thinking of the person who comes into Jack Rose, the person that would buy a barrel pick? Are you thinking price point? Are there moments when you've thought, that's a little more than I would want to sell it at, but I think it's worth it? And I think it would still sell.
If it's an amazing expression, if it's a difference between 200 and 250, and I think it's an amazing absolute expression, then we'll pull the trigger. Simply because we think it is so transcendent that we're like, you know what? I know this may be out of balance for what the market would see if it's sitting on a shelf next to 3 other things from the distillery. Is it worth the extra $50? Yes. Like, let's face it, an individual cask, I don't care if it's 6 years old or 30 years old, if it's amazing and you don't think you're ever going to have another opportunity to have a cask of this quality, you will pay that money. And I want to. My only concern is that I can look you in the face and say, I would, this is a must-have. Yeah. Now, there's the categories of must-haves that you're like, okay, if it gets offered to me, I'm going to spend the money at. And then there's also the solid drinker. We say that a million times. I say it over and over. This is a solid drinker. So it's $65, it's $85, it's $105. This is a solid drinker. It's got these notes. They're there. They're present the whole way through. It's not a thinker. It's not flipping. It's not changing. It's a solid drinker. This is what you should have for $75 or $100, whatever. So categorizing whiskey into those categories of being like those transcendent single casks, or that solid drinker, or this is a utilitarian one that is, Evan Williams bottle and bond for $19. Throw it in an old fashioned. Throw it in a Sazerac. Drink it neat if you want to. Throw it on the rocks on a hot day. Doesn't matter. It is such a solid value that it's got so many uses, you should just have it at your house. And there's plenty of those out there. So you just have to categorize what, and we always say drink your mood. Mm-hmm. So, am I into thinking and sitting and enjoying one dram for hours?
Yes.
Am I talking with friends and we are just having a great time and this is delicious and you don't even think about it. You're drinking something so delicious that it's making you happy, and that is flowing into the conversation and stuff, those kind of solid drinkers. And then there's those whiskeys where, we're going to be doing a lot of cocktails tonight, or, I'm just watching a game and I just want something to sip on. Yeah. You just have to drink your mood, and your mood may not always be whiskey. We always say that. If you want to have a whiskey cocktail, do that, but, it might be sparkling tonight. And that's why being a well-rounded bar and restaurant is, I'm into cocktails tonight. I'm into sparkling. We have so many people that come in. Well, I'm at Jack Rose and I have a whiskey. I was like, well, are you in the mood for whiskey? If you're in the at all, then I'll take you on a journey. If you're not, why not get a great beer? There's plenty of great beers out there. We want you to have the best experience first. And if that involves whiskey, then this is the place for it. And if it doesn't involve whiskey, this is the place for it. So
that's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I have to say, you and I have been enjoying the Kilchoman Jack Rose pick of the lightly peated and ex-bourbon. It continues to be so wonderful. Thanks so much for pouring it. And then during this interview, you went away and you got the Linkwood Octave that you just picked up a couple of bottles of on a shelf at a store that will remain unnamed. It's phenomenal. It's gingerbread in a glass.
Yeah.
It's from the Duncan Taylor Octave series. Yeah. And thank you so much for pouring it. And even, I think, opening the bottle for it, right?
Yeah, I can see why this is one of Chris's nostalgic drams for him.
Hell yeah.
Getting into, starting to work here, getting to run the ladder and pull down whatever, and try and educate. And this one holds a special place in his heart. And now that I drink it, I'm just like, oh, wow, because this was a forgotten dram to me. Like I said, the Duncan Taylor Octave Craggamore was the one that was front and center for us because it was such a fantastic value when it came out. To be able to offer it to customers, we were pumping it out like crazy, especially, hitting that sherried cash strength. Here it is, a sherried cash strength dram that's amazing, that's cheaper than all the OBs that are sherried. And you're just like, it won the day. But this snuck in, and this was completely different. So I'm on the hunt for more of these. When will you air this?
Maybe 4 weeks, maybe 6.
So I've got 4 weeks to hunt every auction before this gets out here.
Well, and we also haven't given a lot of details attached to this, just so that you're not competing too much. But let me say cheers to you, Bill. And
thanks.
Cheers to Jack Rose.
There are a few things I want to say. Firstly, Bill, thank you so much for giving all the time you did to Jason. We all know you're a busy guy, and the fact that you could have kept on going, it means a lot. And the fact that it was obvious there's a part 2 in our future, right? So I am looking forward to that, and hopefully for part 2, I can come and join you guys because I'd love to have that 3-way conversation. But I need to say something to you, Jason. You texted me sometime earlier last week, and I told you, it was on Sunday. I said I'm heading over to Dr. Matt Lurin's house. He has this phage festival he's doing, right? And we were calling in James Wills to do a spiel on Kilchoman. Susanna Skyver Barton was there. We were interviewing him. Like, there was a whole thing going on. It was like whiskey life returning to normal again. And I said, I'm not looking forward to this drive into Long Island, mostly because driving in Long Island's a goddamn nightmare. But you had said, and this was very good advice from you, you had said, could you listen to the Bill Thomas audio? And I said, man, that is such a great idea. I got into my car. I forgot to put the audio on my device, and I never got to listen to it. But after
nothing honors a guy like telling him you didn't do the thing he'd asked you to do. Perfection. Thank you.
I'm nothing if I'm not honest, Jason.
Thank you.
But what I did was I got home maybe around 8 o'clock or so, 8:30. It's around bedtime. And I said, you know what? Instead of watching some TV, I'm going to listen to that conversation because I wanted to listen to it before you and I recorded today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be very honest here, Jason. That conversation you had with Bill was some of the best interviewing I have ever heard. And that includes conversations with Terry Gross and her guests and some
wow.
of the best TV personalities and their guests. How you were able to take it from a let's get to know Bill and what was life like in DC during the 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s, and how did it shape you to shape your decisions to do everything that you're doing. It was so well constructed, and you have something that I don't have, and I'm really jealous. You're such an amazing active listener. And I'm not that. I do my best, but you know me. I'm like, oh, shiny quarter. There's a seagull, squirrel. Just so the listeners are aware, I haven't told you any of this.
You haven't. That's why I'm laughing to deflect from it.
But I have to say, it is up there with some of the best interviews I've heard in my life. I just really think it's phenomenal.
Thank you ever so much. That's incredibly kind. As soon as you throw in Terry Gross from NPR, holy shitballs. That's high praise.
I would
that's a bit much.
I would imagine that there's other listeners who would say the same. I mean, it really was a remarkable conversation. I was able to learn things about Bill that I would never have thought to ask, and I would never have connected the dots in the way that you were able to connect them.
Well, thank you. That really does mean the world to me. The reason I was laughing at the active listener part is because if you could see inside my brain when any interview is going on, I'm definitely listening to the person, but I'm also almost taking notes on what has been said, what I've already asked, what I'd like to ask going forward. There's a lot of plate spinning going on in my head, and I don't always feel like I'm listening as actively as I would be if we were just chilling. And so the fact that you make the comment that you do really means a lot to me, because I don't feel like I'm pulling it off as successfully as you just identified. So thank you very much.
You would not have known. It's obvious that you're thinking about things. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You're receiving the information, you're thinking about it, you're forming questions, and maybe questions get altered by the end of the previous answer to your previous question. But anyway, whatever it is, job well done. Job well done.
All right, thank you. The other thing that, if you think about the training, where I used to be the student listening to the philosophy professor, trying to keep all things in front of me, and I Tamara, my wife, makes fun of me all the time because I took no notes. I just would attend a lecture, I would listen, I would pay very close attention, and I would try and internalize what was being said. Then, as a professor, and people say to me all the time, do you miss the classroom? I miss interacting with students. I don't miss grading. I don't miss department meetings. I don't miss the headaches that administration passes down on faculty. But I miss being in the room with 18 to 22-year-olds, listening to their ideas, engaging with them, trying to listen to what they're saying, and trying to shape it, sometimes polish it, to make it something even better that they can think or say or share. And so in an interview, I'm obviously not trying to reshape what the person is saying, but I'm listening to them intently and thinking about how that informs everything else that's going on within the interview. And so when I really do take it as a compliment when you talk about active listening. I have spent my life since I was about 18 years old, working on active listening. And my wife would say I've got a long way to go. I remain a student in a lot of ways, but I greatly appreciate that you see it and recognize it. I'm going to say one more thing, only because I've been trying to make sense of another comment for a few years since it was made, and maybe you'll remember who made it. We had a listener write in to say they considered Howard Stern to be an incredibly good interviewer.
Yes.
Because he gets people to reveal things about themselves that they wouldn't ordinarily do. And that person who wrote in said, and I don't believe my own press, I'm just quoting, partly because of what you've said and partly because of what I've been trying to make sense of for years. They said they thought of me as an interviewer every bit as good as Howard Stern.
Yeah.
And I don't listen to Howard Stern. That really didn't mean anything to me. So when you said Terry Gross, I'm kind of blown away in this moment when I'm like, oh, that means that. And I understood the person talking about Howard Stern to be making a compliment of the highest order.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it wasn't one that I could necessarily access.
I remember the comment. Part of me wants
I want to say it was a Ben Homan or a Balancer.
or a Tim. I want to say Tim Mushaw. I want to say Tim Mushaw.
I didn't think it was a Tim Mushaw comment.
And anyway, I do remember that comment being made, and I agree with it. And the only thing that I will add is, if you ever can go back and find some Stern archive interviews, it's well worth your time. He's an excellent interviewer. He's not just a shock cock jock. He's an excellent interviewer.
And that's what you said when that comment came in. And I really only know him as the shock jock kind of guy. And so I was kind of like, I don't think I see that in myself. And then here's the final thing, and then we'll go into a quick news segment. What I said a moment ago there about missing the students, being in the classroom, listening to the students, I always enjoyed them. Mm-hmm. And when conducting interviews, you and I doing it together, me doing it solo, whatever the shape of it is, I really enjoy people. And I really enjoy listening to people. Mm-hmm. And I'm nosy, right? I love learning more about people. And it's so great when you walk in and you say, I'd love to interview you for the podcast One Nation Under Whiskey. People will tell you things. You can just ask them things and they'll tell you.
Yeah.
Like, it's very powerful. And I love it when people... We just had this in talking to Greg the other week, when he talked about being in Glasgow and getting that bottle of the Glenlivet, and it being so special, and it living on even when he came back to America, it lived, on a shelf on top of his fridge, right? And he was saving it for a special occasion.
Yeah.
Like, just opening that door into one small part of someone's life is so incredibly powerful. And in hearing it, I'm always thinking, okay, where do we go next? Where's the next place I can be nosy, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very good disarming way to get into a conversation, right? Obviously, we're curious about all the guests that we have. People like to talk about themselves and what they've done, and I think that's a good way to get in there and really open them up. And yeah, just job well done, sir.
Can I add one more thing?
The last one was meant to be the one thing you were adding, but go ahead. I'm feeling generous.
I knew you were going to say yes. And
I didn't even take it all back.
I didn't even pull my ace in the hole, which is it's about you. As soon as I say that, I know I'm going to get to add it.
Yeah, please hold on. Undivided attention.
Yeah, that ace, I was just keeping up this sleeve over here. So I've now done a Bill Thomas by myself. I ended up doing the Greg Swartz by myself when you got called away to something on the home front. You and I have done so many interviews as a pair that I know there are times in interviews when I can take a little break from the plate spinning and I can let you spin some plates. And in sitting with Greg and sitting with Bill, in my mind, I told you this over text, in my mind, I'm asking myself, what would Josh be asking here? Because there are plenty of times when you ask a question when I go, I hadn't even thought to ask that. Yeah, that is the question in this moment. And so I do try to represent you when I'm by myself. I do ask myself, it's one of the many plates that's being spun. What's Josh going to be wanting to know? And I told you this over text for the One Nation Under Whiskey listeners, going to be waiting
Yes. Yeah.
for us to ask as well. And that's another one of the plates that's getting spun. So even though I've done these solo, you have very much been, if not in the room, in my head, and been one of my plates being spun. So hopefully my goal is to do you proud when I'm conducting these solo as well.
Well, I definitely felt dizzy the day that you conducted the interview, so plate spun quite well.
I would say I spun you around, right round, baby right round. Like a record, you could say.
Round, 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 round.
Right round, right round. Okay, enough of this. Gosh.
So listen, I don't think that we have any pressing news. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
There's nothing pressing, but there's definitely updates.
All right, let's call the paperboy. I'm going to let you update. Oh, it's not.
But just make sure he doesn't shout, because I don't want too much attention, just a little bit of attention.
I'm not going to lie to you. He has one volume. He's just shouty, this boy. He's shouty.
He's shouty. Okay, get your shout on, but don't draw too much attention to us.
All right, come on, Jimmy.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it. Me and that Playboy in trouble.
As I was saying before, that little shouty bastard got all up in my grill. Just some updates.
Okay.
Retail release number 7 is in the United States and is on its way to distributors. Hopefully should be appearing on retail shelves. Our social media is blowing up with images, comments, responses to what is happening with release number 7. The excitement around it is palpable. And that has me, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume you, very happy. Very excited.
I will allow you to put those
relieved.
words in my mouth because they were already there. So,
So it's off to a great start. The response, I did lead the podcast with it, but the response around the Stones of Stenness release was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And selling that out in 90 minutes, as always, remains incredibly exciting for us. The support from the nation
amazing.
just means the world to us. And that is so very, very cool. The third rest of the world retail release has been selected. Bottling has been requested. That should be pressing ahead. I'm being very careful to not attach months or dates or anything. Know that it is very much in progress. And that's really exciting.
Yep.
And then, as again we said earlier in this podcast, always looking 6 months out, retail release for the United States, number 8, has been selected. We're a little earlier on in there, but progress is being made. And as we're talking about releases, our good friends even farther north than where you're sitting in Connecticut, Joshua, our friendly Canadians have got a release happening later this year.
Yes.
A lot of product is on a slow boat to Canada.
Can I add a bit of news?
Nothing would make me happier.
We have collaborated once again with Aganorsa Leaf on a cigar project. So about a year and a half ago, we sent one of our rye casks to them, and they created a cigar that had a Connecticut wrapper and Nicaraguan fill, and then matured the cigars in that rye cask. And to my knowledge, I can't think of any other cigar that's had a rye cask finish. But that sold out in just a couple of days. Come July 26, we'll have a new cigar out. We sent a Tennessee bourbon cask to Aganorsa Leaf, and they created new cigars, same size as before, this Robusto size, but they did a box press of it. So that's going to change. That's going to change the pull on it. It's going to change the overall flavor profile and the feel of the cigar. And Yoni Miller, who's our in-house cigar czar, is just over the moon with this. So the collaboration wasn't just a two-way between us and Aganorsa Leaf. It was also with twoguyscigars.com out of New Hampshire. And is when you said, just to the north of me, that reminded me, wait a second, New Hampshire's to the north of me. I need to bring up this news. So it's being sold exclusively through Two Guys Cigars. It's going to happen on July 26th. You can check out their website, sign up for their newsletter, and you'll get some more information on it. Single Cast Nation members will have advanced access to these cigars. There's going to be a lot, right? We made 2,000 sticks, so that's 200 boxes of 10 cigars. So there's a good amount available. We're giving our Single Cast Nation members a 2-hour lead. And so if you're a Nation member, we will be emailing you that information. Once we have it, we don't have the URL yet. If you're not yet a Nation member and you are a cigar smoker, please go to singlecastnation.com, sign up for a free membership. It is free. Just your name, your email, boom, you're in. We will email you the information once it comes.
Are the cigars just shipping within the United States? I don't really know regulations around cigars.
Jeepers creepers. I don't know the regulations around cigars either. Well, you know what, Jason? That's an excellent question. I'll find out the information. I'll find out the answer to that and see if I can give it to you and to our listeners for the next episode.
Awesome. If I may ask another question.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Was it our 12-year-old Tennessee barrel or our 14-year-old Tennessee barrel that went to them?
That is an excellent question. Now, I've been trying to look through my records, and normally I have very good records. I can trace everything back. It may take a while, but normally I have very good records. And where I am so far in this, in my sleuthing, is that these cigars were matured in a cask that was part of the Pappy Nonsense blend, if you will. In blend is a tough word. A marriage of Tennessee bourbon casks from a singular distillery. I think it was from that marriage of casks. Now, we also did 2 store exclusives with these Tennessee bourbons, but as far as my records can tell, neither of those 2 casks were the ones that went to Aganorsa Leaf. So I think it was part of the Pappy Nonsense bottling.
Okie dokie. If I can add one more update.
Yeah.
I stand by everything we said about the Stones of Stenness 17-year-old being every bit as good as the 18-year-old from an Orkney distillery that is not Scapa that was releasing some 18-year-olds back in the early 2000s that were exemplary. This stands up to that. I love it. I love it when we make a statement and then we take a multi-month pause and then we test that statement and we get proven correct. I'm on my second pour here. I just popped the cork again there. This is a drinker, and if you don't have it, I'm sorry. I will not belabor my point. But if you do have it, boy, do you have a little scorcher in your collection.
I know you like it when things get proven. I like it when they get proven, but no.
No, that's what happens to bread.
No, that's proof. That's proof. We don't use that word around here. Listen.
Proved.
Proved. Do we have any other news? Because if we don't have any other news...
I'm racking my brain. We do, of course, have more bottlings coming to Single Cask Nation Online, US Nation members. The Westland is still in bottling production.
Correct.
Which, fun little wrinkle on that one. The wrinkles have never ended with that one, but the magic continues. Can't wait to release it. Can't wait to get that onto my desk so I can sit and drink that as well. Gosh, that's going to be delicious. And then many, many more coming behind that. Yeah, there's a lot of whiskey to be talking about.
Yep, it's all super exciting stuff. I cannot wait to get my Orkney and those two Westlands. That cask number 437 that peated, it still may be the best Westland I've ever had, and I'm looking forward to get my bottle to see if I am proven correct. I'm
waiting on the muscatel, to be honest, but here we go. And it's the peated that was distilled on my birthday, and so
I know, right?
But gosh, that Westland and muscatel, special stuff. Anywho, moving right along.
We received an email from Single Cask Nation member and listener Ben Homan, and I wanted to bring it to your attention and to the attention of our listeners. Mind if I do that?
I would love you to. It gives me a chance to sit and sip on my whiskey.
I have to. Oh my gosh! You know you're getting old when. Oof! That was me increasing
bigifying
the size.
it.
I just need to make this a little bigger. So, again, from Ben Homan, email came in on July 2nd, just 2 days before America's birthday, and the subject is, "You asked for emails, so here it is."
Right.
And so
that sounds like he's throwing down the gauntlet.
This is him dropping mics. I like
You
that.
asked for a competition where we hunt humans. Well, here it is. And you're one of them.
Hello, J, and now E. And then he puts in parentheses. You ready for this? Because he's so good. He puts in parentheses, Joshua goes first in my mind because I know him so well. Sorry, everyone else. And
I'll allow it.
just so our listeners are aware, Ben is not only a Single Cask Nation member, he's not only a One Nation Under Whiskey listener, but he's also a friend, and he's part of my local whiskey group, him and his dad, Mark Homan. So, two really dear people to me. So, he goes on with his email and says, now that some of the white whales you wanted to bottle as a company have been achieved, what distillery is now high on the list as a must bottle? Secondly, with the amazing reception of your blends that have been released, any plans of doing another? Or maybe even being able to craft your own exclusive blend? And then parenthetical comment, if this happens, please remember who suggested it so I get first dibs. And it just says cheers.
That's a short email with a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack. So what should we start with the first one?
White whales?
White whales, right? We did Imperial. We did an 80s Bowmore. Right? We've never bottled a Highland Park, but we've bottled Orkney, and I'm just using names. I'm just using words so people are aware here.
You're not connecting any dots.
I'm not connecting dots at all. So what about let's start with you.
You know the answer to this from me, and it might surprise some of our listeners. I am desperate. I am actively searching out Jura.
I was expecting that answer from you, and it's a controversial.
And you're no less disappointed.
I'm not less disappointed because it's in a way a controversial thing because there are people who are Jura fetishists, like that is their jam, and I get that.
Power to them.
Right, and power to them. They know what they love, and that's fantastic. And I think the same could be held true for Macallan drinkers and for Glenrothes drinkers, right? They know what they like, and that's what they go for. But Jura has never been a distillery that has really fit with our palates. And so are you just looking for a Jura? And so this is a two-part question for you. Are you just looking for a Jura that changes your mind about Jura, but still retains the Jura DNA? Or are you just hoping for something, I don't care what it is, just as long as it's a good whiskey, even if it doesn't resemble what you think of when it comes to Jura?
No, it's definitely the first part of that, because I agree with you. There are people who love Jura, and I don't, and you don't, and many, 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 many people we speak to don't. But it's a Scottish single malt distillery, the only one on its island, just north of Islay. There has to be something there. They have to be doing something. For years I wrote off Glen Scotia. Now I would love to get a Glen Scotia bottled for the company.
That's a great example. Great example, yeah.
For years I avoided Scapa.
Yeah.
And then I started having some good OB Scapa. I haven't really explored much IB, independently bottled Scapa. And I would love to get a Scapa bottled for the nation as well. Mm-hmm. But Jura remains a distillery that I'm not buying, that I'm not drinking, that I'm not enjoying when I find it and I experience it, or someone. And that's another thing. Nobody shares it, right? Nobody says, I got a good Jura, I got to pour this for you, right? Yeah. And it's, I want to unlock the mystery that is Jura, with the other aspect of that being, if you see Jura in Single Cask Nation livery, you know you can buy it. You know you'll enjoy it. But I love your additional part there, which was somehow have the Jura stamp on it, the Jura style on it, but be a really good whiskey that is worth sharing. I just think that whole mystery is fascinating and worth unlocking.
Yeah, the first Jura that I've had where I said, my gosh, this is excellent. No, even better, this is phenomenal, was a 1976 single cask bottled by Jura. And Bill Myers had it in his basement, and he poured it for me, and I was floored by it. I just thought it was excellent, but it didn't taste like the Jura profile, right? It didn't taste like Jura. It could have been anyone's phenomenal whiskey.
And that, to me, is the trouble with the 200th anniversary Jura, that I think was maybe 19, 20 years old, with Gonzalez Baez sherry maturation. Yeah. And it's a stonking good whiskey. Would you identify it as Jura is another question.
I will say, however, though, our friends at Claxton's bottled, I think it was a 7-year in Madeira, and you, me, and Jess, our dear Jess, were at David Sturck's house and tasting that over some pizza. And that was a remarkable little Jura, and it tasted like Jura.
Let me pause you there, Joshua. I've got a FedEx delivery that I got to go get. Sorry to pause you there, but
that's okay.
That was cask samples being delivered.
Oh, we like cask samples.
Yes, we do. And as we know, they don't die in Bridgewater, Virginia. So
let's move on. Right. And so I think that Claxton's
But I remember that Jura well.
Right. And so that shows you, and it did have the Jura DNA. You drank that and you say, this is Jura, but it worked for our palates. And so they produce a ton of spirit that a lot of people are drinking. It was unusual for us, given our palates, to find one that fit. So it leads me to believe that others do exist out there. So I'm with you here.
But take a look at that, right? Madeira, probably a Madeira finish. The Gonzalez Baez, potentially a Gonzalez Baez finish. The 76 you're talking about could have been anybody's 76 whiskey, right? Didn't necessarily have the Jura DNA going on in it. What's one of the things you and I are often most proud of are those distilleries we release in ex-bourbon, where that distillery character can really come through.
Yeah.
And so, gosh, I'm even going to take this up a notch and say White Whale is Jura in ex-bourbon that we stand behind.
Yeah. Yep. There you go. That's a white whale right there. Holy crap.
And then just because it's really easy and obvious, Springbank. Moving on to you. What's yours?
Yeah, right. And that's what I was going to say.
And let me say,
yeah, go ahead.
And to be clear, Springbank that's not $1,000 a bottle. That's the goal.
Thank you. And that's difficult given the current prices. The current pricing structure is terrible. So when you see a bottle of Springbank that's $900, $1,000, a bit more than that, no one's tearing the ass out of the pricing. That's just the price they paid for the cask, and they're going to make that decision, and they're going to sell it, and people will buy it. We've been offered Springbanks at those prices, and we've decided to say no because we just didn't want to charge that price for a Springbank if we did a Springer.
Well, and to be quite honest with Ben here, we've talked over the years about white whales and distilleries that we'd love to get bottled. I think with the current climate in the industry, those white whales have now become aged whiskey at reasonable prices. And so I'm less thinking, what distillery do I want to bottle? And instead, what prices do we want to bottle within? And that's, I think, where the woodcut series has come in.
Yeah.
Where over the course of 4 annual releases, we're trying to operate within a $395 price point.
Yeah.
And who knew when we started that woodcut series that we'd have tariffs, that we'd have a global pandemic, that we'd have the rise of the investment market, subcategory within whiskey blowing prices out the water. And we talk about how the industry changes by decade. There's a 4-bottle annual series that over those 4 years, the industry is almost unrecognizable.
Well, let's add one other element to that, and that is the weakening of the dollar. Right? The dollar is getting weak again. There was a point when
Against Brexit.
Right? There was a point where, when we first started the company, the exchange rate was 1.78, meaning for every pound we had to spend $1.78. And then it went as low as 1.18, and that felt like magic. And now we're up to like 1.42, so it's going back, and it's, oh boy, it doesn't make life easy. But yeah, so Springbank is an obvious one, but we're gonna approach that differently if we ever get access to some again, from a bottle pricing standpoint, right? One of my white whales, aside from Springbank, is Cragganmore. I really want to bottle a Cragganmore.
Agreed.
One of the things that drew me to Cragganmore years ago, and it's something we talk about all the time, is the texture. It is such a richly textured whiskey. And when we were at the distillery in 2014, and our friend Donald Colville had given us some new make to taste, it was so rich and heavy and meaty. But then you let it mature for 12 years, 15 years, 18 years, and all of the fruit comes out, and there's the honey, and it's just such a glorious whiskey, and it's such a classic name, right? For the most part, I tend not to be fussed about names, but I think Cragganmore is such a strong name, and it's one of those things like, what's your pride piece? What's your status bottling? For me, bottling a Cragganmore is a status bottling.
Oh, without any shadow of a doubt,
Yeah.
I would throw Talisker in there.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, right.
And I have literally no idea how we would even go about sourcing a Talisker. But gosh, I would love to bottle a Talisker, and again, at the right price.
Yep.
As I'm sitting here thinking and listening to you, Glenfiddich. And I'm gonna give the game away here,
All right.
because at auction it has now reached a price that I won't go to.
You're going to give this one away? Oh, because it's reached
I
a
am
price that
gonna
you won't
give
go
this
to.
away.
Okay. Yeah, okay, go
I'm
ahead.
going to give away this little one. But I would love to bottle a Glenfiddich, which is a statement I never thought I would ever say. But look at the Glenfiddich that Jess and Swede Scott, Chris Hallstrom, poured for us in 2017 at our Mullavo tasting with our great Isla Swim tour group. That was a peated Glenfiddich, bottled for the Spirit of Speyside Festival. The way I'm talking, you'd think I just bought a half dozen of these, and I'm trying to bump up the price at auction. I literally don't own one, and I desperately want to, but they're too much for me now. That was poured blind, and everybody in the group, who are all Isla heads, standing, no relation to the heads family of Isla, just to be clear, standing on the Mull of O, on the southwest tip of the east side of Isla, all fucking loved it. Loved it. And then Jess and Swedes got revealed, oh yeah, that's a peated Glenfiddich. And we all went, yes please, I'll take some. Thank you.
It wasn't just peated, it was peated and heavily sherried as well.
Lordy,
Right?
lordy,
It was
lordy.
it was phenomenal coming and going. It was just a wonderful whiskey, and I don't think you just said this, because I was trying to listen actively.
That sounds like the opposite of active listening.
I try to be funny every now and again. And so that, along with one of the best long grows I've ever had, was poured, and some old blends, but everything was poured blindly. And it wasn't until the pours were revealed and I went back to that Glenfiddich that I actually tasted the Glenfiddich DNA even behind the peat. And I thought that was a really remarkable thing, right? If you're tasting it blindly, you taste peat, you'd never go there. But once you have a little bit of information, if you know Glenfiddich, you can say, oh, all right, okay, yeah, it is there.
And that's Jess's thing, where she's a Glenfiddich lover. And that's always sounded peculiar to me, just because of my own journey. But then you taste that one particular release and you go, oh yeah. Or I've been in places where the Glenfiddich brand ambassador has poured single cask samples.
Yeah.
And you go, this is Glenfiddich? Like,
Yeah.
oh, there's a reason they got as big as Coca-Cola.
Yeah,
Like, there's
right.
a reason. This is really good. But their standard releases, just like we said with the Jura earlier, just haven't worked for my palate. Just don't fit my palate. The strength, the chill filtering. But they're making good liquid. There's no doubt about it. There are single casks in there that are delicious. I'll add another example. The Glenlivet, right? Just to bring it back to our friend Greg. That Glenlivet. Bikram at Norfolk Wine and Spirits just put out a signatory Glenlivet that is absolutely
Phenomenal.
brilliant.
Yep,
And I've been
wonderful
buying it in multiple places.
Yep. Yeah, that was a...
By that I mean from Bikram and at auction.
that was a remarkable one. And you can find Glenlivet independently bottled. Glenfiddich, not so much. Can I give you one last one?
Yes.
In my opinion, one of the best OB bottlings that was made available, sadly now gone, or the cask type has changed, but reliably excellent OB was the Balvenie 15-year-old single barrel when it was a bourbon barrel, first fill bourbon. And each one was just as good, if not better than the next. And boy, what I would give to bottle a Balvenie of that caliber. But Balvenie
without doubt.
don't sell, right? You know, you could do a Burnside, but then that's teaspooned. But yeah, you know, I
Wink.
wink. But yeah, Balvenie would be way up there. And as I'm saying this, I think about your comment about the Cragganmore being so honeyed. Balvenie is very honeyed, right? I'm discovering my palate as I'm talking aloud. So there you go. Yeah.
I will say, just to if not end this segment, to transition within this segment.
Well, yeah, because we have another question to answer.
From Ben.
From Ben, yeah.
Is we just secured a little distillery cask in the United Kingdom, thanks to the diligence of Jess, that you never forget where you were when you had your first one.
You never forget where you were when you had your first one. And holy crap, this was a distillery that we've been desperate to bottle from since the beginning. And the fact that we have this cask, I'm so excited. What a tease. What a tease.
I will say no more. Part 2.
Part 2. So what's the other part of his question? Let's go back to
the
this.
blend. The success of blends. We mentioned in the news segment about our friends in Canada. They, God bless them, are bringing in a heavily sherried, heavily alcoholed, blended malt that is going to turn heads across Canada. Mm-hmm. It is going to do so well for them. You know, Edrington distillate, heavily sherried with just a little bit of peat and a good ABV. Oh, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa. Jason's on the floor convulsing.
No, that's a remarkable one. I'm so excited for that to be in Canada. I'm jealous of our neighbors to the north. But let's transition really quickly to Ben's further question of a proprietary blend. Would you ever want to do that? Would you ever want to have because
of I've said it done so. Sorry. What was your question? Would I ever want to?
Would you ever want to have a proprietary blend? I mean, obviously, I guess we couldn't call it Single Cask Nation if it had some sort of continuity to it. Does that even tickle your fancy? We haven't really talked about it. I mean, we've touched on it here and there, but we've never gone into much depth. Given
My love and adoration for Glasgow Blend, there's a little something there, but it's not to the forefront of my mind. I would rather have a proprietary single malt that we put out.
I like that idea. Jason Johnston Yellen. Jason, 3 names.
We should get in the time machine, go back to 2017 and start discussing this, because it might take 5 years to come to market.
Oh, my gosh. Ben, thank you so much for your questions. Hopefully we've answered them to your satisfaction.
Did you say satisfaction?
Yeah,
satisfaction.
I was thinking
like
of I was calling my inner David Lee Roth, who he would say sassified. And I was like that, sassified.
I didn't know that about David Lee Roth.
Yeah. Oh, come on. Yeah.
Oh, come on, like it's obvious. Is it in his biography or something? Have I missed a trick here?
So listen, there's one other thing that I want to bring up before we head out of here, because we do have to head out of here. But if you, not you, Jason, but if you, the listener, are interested in sending a question our way, you could do what Ben did. Email us questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. You could also send us messages through our Instagram @onenationunderwhiskey. You could reach out to us by Facebook. Just go to the Facebook search bar, look for One Nation Under Whiskey. You can message us that way. And if you enjoy the Twitters, we are @OneNationWhiskey. And you can reach out to us there. And, of course, we never spell whiskey with the E. So if you want to reach out to us, just make sure you spell it without the E, like the vast majority of the world do.
All of that is true.
Now, we received a fun little comment on Apple Podcasts, and I wanted to read that because I thought you know what, we promised our listeners anytime a new comment came in, we would read it on the podcast. So,
and goodness knows, when we make promises, boy, do we keep them.
Boy, do we keep them. So this comment,
all the people, all the listeners waiting on a worm tub episode are rolling their eyes right now.
Oh, God damn it, Jason. You had to bring up worm tubs.
Well, you brought up the Cragganmore earlier and how it was heavy and meaty, and it got me thinking.
So this comment came in July 1, and it was written by Reaper73, REEPER 73. And the title of it says, "So great." And he or she gave 5 stars.
Thank you.
It says, "This podcast is fantastic."
You
Jason,
had me at podcast.
he'll have you again because he says, Jason and Joshua. See how he did this? See what he did there? Or she? I should see what this person did there. Jason and Joshua.
That's because they know Jason better. I'm quoting Ben Holman.
Can I read this goddamn comment? I'm afraid you're going to interrupt
Should
me.
I pour another whiskey?
Oh, God damn it. Can I go?
Please.
Okay. Jason.
Right
Zip it. Jason and Joshua are both hysterically entertaining and extremely knowledgeable whiskey geeks. They get amazing guests and give great interviews. In one word, this show is ... smooth. One exclamation point.
I always love it when someone's listened to more than one episode and has pulled together a few in-house jokes. That's nice. That's real nice. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, I think they proved their point.
Yeah, they showed us the proof, which is great. Reaper73, thank you so much for your comment. We really appreciate that. And anyone else, if you want to leave a little comment in Apple Podcasts, give us your 4 or 5 stars. We would love that. Leave a comment. We'll read it on the podcast. If you have a rating that is 1 or 2 stars and you have a problem with us, you can always email us, questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. That's always best.
If you've made it to this part in the podcast that you have hated that much,
the whole time this person's fuming. Oh, you know what? Oh, I can just email them and tell them how much I hate them. All right, here we go. Do.
Yeah, if I could actually just ask, here we are in the middle of July. Mm-hmm. If you've been meaning to tell a friend about this podcast, could you go ahead and do it now? And just say, hey, subscribe, give this a listen. You'll love it. They are smooth.
Can I tell you, there have been a few people who've reached out to us and said, I've suggested your podcast to friends who are not whiskey lovers because I just enjoy the conversation. And that, and when we set out to do this, obviously we wanted an industry insiders podcast. We wanted it to be fun. We wanted it to be a peek behind the curtain, but we also wanted it to have this sort of car talk feel to it, where anyone can listen to it, whether you're into the whiskey or not. And it's been nice to hear that.
Well, God knows we laugh at our own jokes just as much as they did.
Yes,
so I feel like we're off to a good start. We've had 5 years of huffing our own farts. I think we have been successful in what we set out to achieve.
Yeah.
Don't drive like my business partner. Don't drink like my business partner.
Yes. Listen responsibly. So, do you have anything to add before we say adieu to our listeners?
I don't actually. I moved off my recording screen there to answer some texts from my kid. And so I'm just jumping back in to make sure this has been recording all the good stuff. And I'm pleased to say it has.
Oh, thank God. Thank fuck. Okay, good. Yes.
Let me add this.
Go ahead.
If you've made it this far in this episode, and you were listening to the Greg Swartz episode, thinking, this is good, doesn't sound up to the usual standards that these chaps put out, and for that I commend Joshua. We had a recording on Jason's end where on my recording software I had a metronome running for an hour and a half. And I sent that file to Joshua and said, there is my offering for this podcast. And Joshua did everything in his power to remove the metronome without us having to find the time to re-record the episode, which we would have done, but boy, is that a massive, massive time sink in the schedule. And so no one has actually reached out to say anything sounded any different. Our dear Jess, who is very honest, and you mentioned earlier, Joshua, you're nothing if not honest. Our dear Jess is many, many things and also very honest. And she said, it sounded a little different. But only, and here's the shit sandwich, the compliment shit sandwich, it only sounded a little bit different because I'm so used to the high production values that you chaps put out. So if anyone else was thinking it but didn't write in to comment,
there you go.
I just wanted to throw myself under the bus and give you, Joshua, a commendation for taking care of something that I screwed up on my end. And we didn't have to go back and re-record. You just did a bit of digital jiggery pokery.
I was going to let this episode go by without even bringing that up. But man, did you screw the pooch. And did you give me a lot of work. But
you're welcome. That's what I texted you.
That is exactly what you texted me, which was not the answer I wanted at that time. But I, hindsight being 2020, it was the answer I needed. So,
not all heroes wear cape, Joshua.
Jason, it has been really real.
It has been the realest of the real experiences.
And until next time, we'll see. I'll see you, and we'll be talking with our listeners a week from this Wednesday on an extra. It's all about whiskey episode, and then after that, we really have a wonderful conversation coming up with Bruce Russell from Wild Turkey. So that's going to be a really fun listen for all you bourbon fans out there. So. Until then, I bid you adieu, Jason. And that's adieu. I'm not bidding Jewish people, right? I can say this joke as a Jewish person myself, but you, Jason, cannot, only being married to a Jewish person. Can you do that?
Those pyramids aren't going to build themselves.
Oh my God! 10 plagues upon you, Jason.
Accepted. Actually, I'll go to 11.
11?
11. Freedom!